Hey YouTubers, my name is Mike Wehner. This is my debut novel, The Girl Who Can Cook. It's a psychological thriller. It's going to be on Amazon complete for the next 2 to 3 weeks. So if you start it, please finish it and don't yell at me if you don't. It is a new release. It was released last month. I'm going to tell you just a little bit about it. I'm not going to try and editorialize too much, but it's a psychological thriller / black comedy. It's about a guy, starts out as a revenge story about a guy who goes to work as a line cook in the restaurant of the woman who killed his best friend. It's dark and it's funny, and hopefully you enjoy it. I'm uploading it to YouTube because I've never produced an audiobook before, and I wanted to let a few friends and family, I just wanted a place for friends and family to go check it out and tell me if they found any issues before I upload it to Audible and the ACX exchange and get it out there to sell it. So this is really a quality control thing. So if you have an issue with the quality in some way, I don't know how it is a YouTube video, so it's not going to quite be as good as if you were getting it through Audible or something. But if there's any hisses, buzzes, noise, pops, things that you hear, please put them in the comments. That would be really helpful for me. Other than that, I hope you enjoy it. Okay. Here's the Amazon page. If you enjoy it enough to support me and buy a copy, I would love that. If not, you enjoy it, share it with someone. That doesn't cost you anything, and it really helps me out. So, hope you like it. The Girl Who Can Cook by Mike Wehner. Read by Mike and Kate Wehner. Dedication. In loving memory of Citizen, and to my wife Catherine, minion, friend, finite, skeptic, favorite, infinite, the upper limit of my sequence, without you I trend towards nothingness. Epigraph. For the bear, there was a moment of recognition of her murdered cub, but bears are constantly living in the present, and in the present moment, what's there now is meat on the ground. It's a simple decision at that point if we don't carry the traumas of our past with us. There's meat on the ground. You eat the meat. Aubrey Marcus on the Joe Rogan Experience, episode 809. Chapter 1, day 947. They say you don't love someone if you've never wanted to kill them. If that's the case, then Erin Rhodes was my soulmate. A cheeseburger is something you want. My need to hurt her was entirely different. My car sat in the dark spot between 2 streetlights in front of Erin's restaurant, and I watched silhouettes chew and grin through the glass. I had hours before she was done for the night, before she jerked the front door twice to make sure it was locked, and then slid out the back alley towards her car. I thumbed through a set of pictures on my lap, long since memorized on how to get inside her silver hatchback without a sound. How to shimmy open the door with screwdrivers wrapped in dish towels, then fish a plastic pipe through the gap, and punch the unlock button, and let myself in. When I got tired of the photos, I studied the front door. Who ate there? What they wore? A man struggled to park in the space ahead of me. He swung his boring sedan towards the curb, and backed it out after he'd cut the wheel too soon. The poof of frizzy hair blooming over the passenger seat reached over to console the driver with a forearm pat, like it wasn't a big deal. It was, whether she wanted to admit it or not. The beasts have relocated. Parallel parking is a survival skill in the aluminum wilds of San Francisco's East Bay. My white t-shirt flashed a pink in his brake lights, and I wondered if that was the color blood made when it soaked into a shirt. White, pink, white, pink, pink. Was that Erin's color inside? Diet blood? Her parts must be different from mine. Did she have the blue blood of a spider, or was it a leech's green? Tonight I find out, I thought. Tonight the female isn't deadlier than the male. Tonight she never sees it coming. I sat there so long that the people I watched go in started coming out, so I studied them again to see how they changed. I tried to go inside when I first arrived in California, but the front door was too heavy to move. My footsteps echoed louder the closer I got to the entrance, but when I grabbed the handle, a snuff film erupted in my mind's eye that ended with me in handcuffs. I wanted her dead, but not if I was going to end up in a cage. I'd been sitting out in the dark ever since, scheming ways to kill her without being found out. Erin was the one who deserved to be punished, not me. The kitchen was at the back of the restaurant, behind the rows of talking heads. I only saw it when an explosion of fire burst up from a pan, exposing the room with a brief sepia filter that gave the distant shadows shape. A spark of brandy for the pork, rum for the bananas. After a final study of the photos, I paced the block of rubber-stamped storefronts to see if any were open. The pig in the window of the butcher had closed, branded on its belly. The bank was dark, save for one fluorescent light in the ceiling. The mattress store empty. I noted the cross streets, then walked the alley behind the restaurant and stomped in every puddle to find holes that might break my ankle as I fled the scene of the crime. Nervousness began to swirl in my gut. My gloved fingertips tingled when I dragged them across the passenger door of Erin's car. It was parked along a side street, in a smart spot where the city had removed the yellow line from the curb and the gingivitis stain left behind deterred anyone but a savvy local from parking there. Her tiny hatchback sat in front of a specialty oil and vinegar shop where you might buy your mom a bottle of tangerine balsamic that she'd keep for a year and then throw away. The rain-wet street steamed and the mosquitoes swarmed when I double-checked the license plate. In the bottom center of the back window was an ironic sticker that said, "Enough," a campaign I'd seen on TV at ending domestic violence and sexual abuse. It stretched a tilted Grinch's smile across my face, assured she was a deluded monstrosity. Once I was in the car, there'd be no turning back. I dug my fingers into the door frame and jerked it back a few times before the first screwdriver slid into the top. Hands occupied, I spat and blew at the buzzing insects in my ears. I jerked on the handle to pry open a gap and jam the second screwdriver in, and then palm punch it down to the frame. A gap formed to slide a piece of plastic tubing in and stab at the shadowed lock controls. The sketchy guy in the "for educational purposes only" video fired through these steps in under 15 seconds according to the timer at the bottom of the screen. I kept that pace until I had to push the unlock button. The lip of the pipe rolled off the switch or bowed when I pushed on it too hard. Focused on the task, I stopped paying attention to my surroundings. "Hey, what are you doing?" a meaty pedestrian asked from behind me. "A friend of mine locked her keys in the car." "What's all that stuff you have?" He pulled his cell phone from the pocket of his jeans and held it out like a handgun. "Look," I reached for my phone. "We found this video on how to get into her car. I have it queued up. I think I might be doing something wrong. Maybe you can help." "Where's the owner?" He lowered his phone after pressing a few buttons. I kept my voice steady. "She's on her way. Went home to try and find a spare key. Poor girl can't afford a locksmith, and we don't want to have to break the window. You want to try and push the button?" "I'm getting really frustrated," I said with the pole held out as a peace offering. The man took the plastic in his hands and bowed it a few times, then shrugged and poked it through the slot. By the flashlight function of my phone, he was able to unlock the door after 5 or 6 firm stabs. I thanked him for getting me laid, maybe. He chuckled and walked on. I rested the door against the latch and then vanished into the alley to throw my tools into the nearest dumpster. The trash man must have come that day, because the first screwdriver gonged against the empty metal bottom, sending my heart into a frenzy. I slid the rest of the tools down the front lip and walked back to the car, wishing I had a way to clean dumpster goo from my forearms. The front passenger seat was tilted back like someone had been napping on a long road trip. Coffee cups and wax papers with fractal cheese smears catapulted onto the floor when I flopped the seat up. Paranoia continued rising, and I looked off in every direction simultaneously to make sure I wasn't seen. In the back seat, I yanked a tangle of extra-long zip ties from my coat and fed the ends through their eyelets until they clicked once to form rings. The various loops piled up in a plastic pop art heap of blues and yellows and greens. I sized each circle over the headrest to find one that was the right diameter and weight. I jammed the ill-fitting loops underneath the seat and set the chosen in the center of the floor beneath me. I joined the ring, starting with my knees, and wiggled into the dark below. I wrapped my hands tightly at 10 and 2 on the ring and pressed my nose into the ketchup-stained carpet. Under the seat, the cap of a red lighter reflected the rays of a street lamp. I ducked and peeped the shimmer of light off the metal top to pass the time. Down there in the dark was like any other night in bed. I closed my eyes, and I'm in the rectory with John's family. We're standing over his 5-bulleted body in a circle holding hands. Tonight the holes made a stigmata with a headshot. Other nights, I don't remember. On the floor with nothing to obstruct my view, I laid with a revisionist image of my dead best friend splattered across my sightline, murdered in his own home by the woman he loved. I squeezed the sharp plastic edges with excitement. I was ready to encircle Erin's head, spiral it shut around her throat, and then zip, click, tug until it could get no tighter. Tonight the pain would end. She was finally going to get what she deserved. Voices in the street and footsteps on the sidewalk raced my heart, sweat and breath heavy with worry that someone might see my spine cat-stretched through the window and call the cops. The police would drag me from the bottom of the car to the bottom of the world and bludgeon me to death without asking why I was there, without giving me the opportunity to explain that I was a necessary evil, that I was a real-life superhero out fighting crime and giving the bad guy what she deserved. I wondered which part of me to defend when they dragged me out. Both hands over my face, or one across the head and the other down low to protect my organs from the sharp knock of their steel-toed boots. I mimed out the defensive position I'd take, and as my right arm cradled my rib cage, my left covered my forehead, and the gravel shuffle of feet scratched on the road above me. I eased my hand back to the plastic ring. The door locks chunked, and the front door swung open with a creak. I pressed my hands into the floor as hard as I could to keep them from shaking. I eased the zip tie up the side of the door, head down, suckling rotten tomato air. The front seat rocked and settled as the girl sat, and her keys scraped on the ignition. I inhaled and exploded upwards, a perfect circle in hands, certain the tie end faced me. Her shoulders were my new targets at 10 and 2. The loop slid easily over the headrest and bounced up over her nose. Her hands flew up, flailing and swatting, then both arms raced to her throat the second I yanked back on the tie. She thrashed in every direction. The bottom rim of the plastic hung up on her collarbone, which gave her the freedom to rake and slap at my face and ears behind the seat. The flesh peeled off her neck with each click, click, click. The pin skin popped the same way pork fat does when you rip it off the top of an untrimmed shoulder. Once the collar was secured under her chin, I pressed my forehead against the back of the headrest. Her panic claws took more of my ear, and I huffed a muted sigh of relief into the dense fabric. Blood pinged my forearms as the tie pinched her windpipe shut. The girl had 2 fingers pinned beneath the wire, which made her left elbow flap and knock the window each time I jerked on the cord. I stopped a notch or two short from as hard as I could to watch her from behind, to press my palm into the back of the seat and feel the fight and struggle as she suffocated. After a gorgeous few seconds of frenzy, the jerks became more desperate but less frequent. Her amplitude had peaked. The feminine wave would soon become a flat line. Her light was almost out when a knotted swirl of golden hair unpinned from her ponytail and bobbed between my head and the rearview mirror. I shot my face between the seats to get a look at her. No, this was wrong. Erin's locks weren't blonde. Her hair was the color of a feral Irish pit bull. It was maybe brown or maybe red, but who cares? It's on a monster. We have to kill it. I've never met Erin, but I knew her face. I knew it from photos, videos, and even one of those 10 p.m. network true crime spots on horrible things that are supposed to happen in the great beyond to other people and not to your people. The stammering blonde girl in the driver's seat wasn't the Erin Rhodes I set out to kill, and collateral damage wasn't acceptable. This was justice, not war. Easy. Stop writhing, I said, and eased my hands to her shoulders. She shuddered. Purple-faced, the girl seized back at me. I bit and tore at the thick blue nubbin where the zip tie came together, each tug pinching the back of her head to the seat. Teeth locked and head twisted, I remembered the packaging that had drawn me in. For industrial use. Unbreakable. I let go and she gulped a huge breath of air. The tie was stretched enough that she could breathe, but not well. Her hands tugged on the collar, and once she had air back in her lungs, she roared at me with all the hate and all the fear. Blood from torn gums filled my mouth and smacked metallic while she screamed. She didn't cry or plead. She fought. I liked that. "Fuck you," she said 100 times. "Psychotic piece of shit." She clawed at me, with pretty teal fingernails, even though I was trying to set her free. "Don't move. Stop. I promise. I'm getting it off." The red lighter was now underneath the tie where it stretched. Blood stung my right eye. The car filled with noxious rot, and after a few seconds of heat, I plucked on it to see if it would break. It didn't, so I flamed on until both my eyes burned and my lungs filled with soot. A violent cough blew the lighter out, and the tie gave way. The pretty girl slammed forward onto the steering wheel, and it honked for a lightning strike, which stiffened her upright. She snapped back up and slashed my arm one last time as she shot out the door and ran through the back alley along my primary escape route. I was happy to see her go. She had more passion for hurting me than I'd ever had for Erin. I was afraid to look in her eyes, see what fractional madness I might hold in my own. I splashed puddles down a dark passageway, jetted up a side street, and found my car in the dark spot between twin circles of light. A year later, I sat in the same spot, watching different heads swivel and nod while they ate. The light was different now. It rung across the hood and splashed down through the windshield. A white book on the passenger seat lay in a private spotlight inside the shadowed car. The sun was down and the windows up. Sweat collected on my upper lip, and salt water ran between the cracks into my mouth. A tangled couple shuffled out of the restaurant's front door, their arms knotted together as they doted up the street. They seemed happy for having left that place, and I'd be no different. This was my first time back to that street, to its light and its dark, but I'd never left California. I was going to finish what I started, but I couldn't kill someone unless I was sure that I ought to. My job interview at Essen was scheduled for 9 a.m. the next morning. Grief Journal, opening page. Scratched out. Plan B, if I don't get the job, I'll book a flight out of this mild-weathered nightmare and stop off and stab her in the heart on the way to the airport. Scratched out. 0, 1, 1, 2, 3, 5, 8, 13, 21. My dad told me that he and Mom were getting a divorce on an April morning before school. I was 13 or so and sat in homeroom an hour later, waiting for the middle school version of the morning news to come on. I was upset, not by what he said, but by the matter-of-fact way he said it. Dad was a faucet of platitudes who worked as an electrician, but hated everything that ran on electricity. An analog guy who believed a man should mow his own lawn, shovel his own snow, and shut the hell up if life was hard, because things could always get worse. When the news clicked on, a reporter was standing in the rain next to a mousy teen girl, face streaked with mascara, wailing about her fallen hero Kurt Cobain. Cut to the shot of his lifeless foot in a 1-star through the doorway. Cut back to the girl in an extra-large t-shirt covered with crooked lyrics and song titles, scribbled on with colored markers that smelled like fruit. Across her breasts it read, "Milk it." I put my head down on the desk and cried so hard that snot pooled and ran off the edge into my shoe. I hated Nirvana. That was the last time I remember crying, and that's what I thought of the night John was killed. I tried to remember what it was like to cry, because I couldn't. I was the man of the house now, my dad told me all those years ago. No time for tears. When a man like that suggested I look into getting some kind of therapist, I took it to heart. This was after John's funeral. I went on a leave of absence from work and spent most of my time on the couch watching TV with the volume too low to hear, but loud enough for the muffled infomercial voices to keep me awake. Dad came by every few days after work with beer, at 3 or 11. His condolence mutated into condescension as the weeks passed. Mom came too, with pans of lasagna, and she'd pull a chair up next to the couch and rub my head from above while I rubbed my dog Zeke's the same heartfelt way. She collected empty beer bottles and counted them off as each one clinked into the recycling bin. When Dad stopped bringing beer and started suggesting therapy, I complied. I saw Dr. James, then I saw Mrs. Gallmeyer. After they didn't work out, it was on to Tim. Don't know what his title was. Tim ironed his jeans and crossed his legs all the way over so his feet came together backwards, pinky toes stacked. He clicked his loafers when he thought I was taking too long to answer a question. It made me feel the way a waiter does when you snap your fingers to get their attention. I told Tim he wasn't the first mental health professional I'd seen, and he said that until I wanted help, he wouldn't be the last. After what happened in the back seat of that car, maybe he was right. I enjoyed talking to him. He helped me even if I didn't take much of his advice. Not that it mattered. Once I saw that book, I went all seek and destroy. That did it for me. That's when she had to die. Kill my best friend? Shame on me. Sell it to the courts as self-defense? Shame on me. Profit on his death? Shame on you. The therapist suggested I keep a grief journal and schedule the act of mourning since I was doing it always. Get a notebook, he told me, and set aside time each day to grieve. When that time is up, you can go back to living your life. The blonde girl from last year was a happy accident. If Erin had been the one in the car, and I strung her up with my plastic lasso, I'd have regretted it forever. There's no honor in killing her from the dark. I'll take my time, find a way into her life, and make her suffer as I have. Until then, this book is my time to grieve, and when it's shut, so is the sadness. I can't believe I paid $60 for this stupid thing. I hope I get the job. I worked too damn hard to let this all fall apart now. Chapter 2, Day 947. My basement apartment was tucked under the heather foothills a dozen miles east of the bay. The house above me sat in a sleepy development, where each home was backed by open spaces and wavy, pine-topped ridges. Annie, the widow who owned the property, needed the income the dated space provided. The fixtures and finishes were a patchwork of mismatched acid flashbacks, patterns of patterns on patterns. The stainless steel and marble California of my dreams existed, but not for what I could afford in rent. I rolled my knives out onto the flecked teal formica. Sharpening a knife was the first thing I learned at culinary school, I imagined. Honing was subtraction, a repeatable calculation that was easy to master. I used a synthetic sharpening stone and gritted diamond steel to edge my chef's knife. I preferred to use the 8-inch for most tasks. The 10-inch I'd bought felt like a broadsword on a gusty day in my undersized hands. The sharpening steel is that fencing sword thing with the round handle stuck in every knife block. The steel smooths out what the stone grinds away. It removes debris. I thought that you were supposed to yank it out of the block and then wipe the knife on it, back and forth like drying dishes with a towel. They do that in the movies for the chings and clanks. Sounds neat. Does nothing. It's absurd that every knife block comes with a steel, because it's useless without a stone. I threw my wet hand over the synthetic rock. Rubbing it down and letting the grain massage my palm, I began scraping the knife back and forth. It was easy to fake an education so long as nobody tried to verify it. The pretensions of academia are most clearly held by its students, even the ones who study kale. I thought if I acted confident enough, my credentials wouldn't be called into question. My resume claimed that I attended the best culinary school the American West had to offer, but all those lazy hours I spent mocking food TV over the years didn't give me the head start I expected. I was better prepared to work at a cupcake shop than a commercial kitchen. I tried to absorb a lifetime of cookery in the duration of an early-term pregnancy to prepare for a job as a cook. It was the only way I could figure to get close to Erin. Choosing knives was hard. Cooking is a uniform society. Accessories tell your story. According to network cooking competitions, a chef creates their identity with their steel and their ink, so I spent as much time looking at knives as I did tattoos. A chef's knife splashed across the forearm was ubiquitous, the tramp stamp of the food world. Pigs and pig products were in vogue, the mark of obnoxious hipsters who'd be dated by the swine as soon as America's bacon fetish ended. I gravitated towards personalities who favored marks of utensils rather than food, the caveat being there were no intended puns. No knives up the sleeve, or, God forbid, whisks on the upper lip. Olive hue, wrapped in a heart. Butter me up, wrapped in a ribbon. Fuck those awful people. I wanted to fit in, but tattoos were out. I've never believed in anything long enough to keep it forever. Not even myself. The worst kind of food people invented elaborate hierarchies for every ingredient. A woman with a cartoon rainbow shard on her biceps dueling turnip greens. A paragraph on the thick shin of a man about which country's rocks make the best salt. The bust of a well-known tea sommelier traced onto the thigh. These people exist, and they're allowed to breed. Choosing what to eat can be reduced to one small notion for every person on Earth. Eat more of what you think tastes good and is good for you than what tastes good and is bad for you. If you don't like it, don't eat it. Unless you're a guest in someone's home, then put it in your mouth, shut the fuck up, and chew. Don't forget to smile. For every 50 things I hated about the culture, there was something I found interesting. The way the grit of steak disappeared once I understood the grain of meat and how to slice it. The mysterious wet shoe funk of fermented beans and cabbages from the Chinese grocer. In my former life, I was an engineer, a life of calculate and execute. The walls of rationality and science are a far cry from the endless textures, tastes, and smells of the kitchen. The variables are so numerous that originality is certain every day, even if by accident. Business casual life wasn't something I wanted to escape from. I liked golf shirts with company logos. I wasn't crushed and soul-deadened by my two-bed, two-bath existence. I turned the blade over and ran my eyes down the sharpened edge looking for debris, then flipped it over and back to make sure it was wearing evenly. The first knife I purchased was a reliable yet unimpressive German blade. It was the first knife I'd ever used that could slice a tomato without crushing it. It's the same knife tattooed on the forearm of every celebrity chef who rolls up his sleeves when it's time to get serious. Erin's restaurant had German elements in the food. I needed to be on message, a variation of the theme. Her place was called Essen, which means eat in German, but when I looked over the online menu, the food was actually overpriced and restyled comfort dishes from all over Europe, gussied up for the semi-serious palates of semi-fine diners. I was familiar with this food before studying the culinary arts. I grew up eating it. Chicken paprikash. My grandma made that every Christmas Eve, but it sure as hell didn't cost her $32.95 a plate. Chef Erin thought she was clever by laying gold leaf on top of peasant food with her plating tongs. I called them food tweezers. Goulash doesn't need a top hat, you cunt. Still at the counter, I angled the blade on the stone, ripped it towards me, then fanned it away. The scrapes were a satisfying symphony, and my hands conducted an even time. On to the second blade, an expensive 7-inch Japanese sentoku. It had a black Damascus finish and wandering meteorite veins, too beautiful to think of as only a tool. The edge vanished and expanded back with a fantastical shimmer when I slanted it in the store. It was exotic and unfamiliar and untouchable, like a woman you meet on vacation whose language you don't speak. I had to have it. All my knives have different makers. I wanted them to tell the other cooks I was selective yet adventurous. When I unrolled the black cloth apron that held the blades across the stainless steel table, Erin should see the German knife first. Old reliable. I meticulously planned each detail of our first encounter. When my chef's knife wouldn't fit in the first slot of the padded holder, I took it apart and reworked it. I had to get close. I had to know what engine drove her to such hate and rage. It was the only path to truth, to know I was doing the right thing. And of course I had to do the right thing, which is often the hardest. My laptop was open on the counter, and I saw her face as I clicked around the restaurant's website. Meet the chef and owner on her profile, where she leaned against an invisible wall on the far right of the screen with her arms crossed, the giant blade pinched between her fingers. Sometime after her book was published, Erin dissolved westward and set up shop just outside San Francisco. She was trying to start over. The devil doesn't eat where he slaughters. That fucking book, the reason I was here. Did it mention there were no signs of physical abuse found by the doctors who examined her the day of the shooting? Or the day after? Numerous friends were called to the stand, and not one could recall so much as a bruise on her liquid paper forearms. It turned out her accusations of abuse by John weren't lies. They were predictions. I scraped faster, eager to get in bed and not be able to sleep. The Santoku finished. I pulled down some pizza coupons stuck to the fridge with a magnetic save the date for a wedding I didn't attend, for friends I didn't talk to anymore, for the life that was no longer mine. I held the shiny paper up in the yellow light, and once it settled I made diagonal slices down the side that flapped in the wind from a box fan sitting on the kitchen table. The little flaps looked like the red feathers in a Native American headdress that fluttered during a rain dance. The sharpness confirmed. My stone needed more water. I batted the palm of my free hand on my lips and sounded the native noises I'd heard in spaghetti westerns as a kid. I pinned the paper back to the side of the cooler and took out my boning knife. I threw some water on the blue-grained sharpening stone. The dance worked, in spite of the racism. Onto the boning knife, the trickiest of the lot. It had a beveled edge and a long curved tip. The handle had to be lifted and kept parallel to the stone and then rolled as you sharpened. I knew it was right if I felt the edge fight back against the stone like chalk dragging against a blackboard. I practiced boning on chicken wings because the work was intricate and they were cheap. I bought bags and bags of them those first few weeks. The overstock forced me to experiment with new tastes and flavors to get them down my poultry-tired gullet. The humble chicken was the path to everything important I needed to learn about food, but no dish more so than the cheap Chinese-American favorite, General Tso's. The wing may have taught me some technique, but So taught me how to taste. There are 5 tastes: sweet, salty, sour, bitter, and umami. My mom would have loved that list. The General's chicken was the first time I experienced them all. It was on a grade school night when no one could agree on pizza toppings and we got white box Chinese takeout instead. I remember the shock of the first bite, the sour suck followed by the sweet release, that wonderful crunch and then the soft, slow burn of the chili. It was the best thing ever. It still is. Every time I traveled as a kid, I ordered that dish, and in each city was a new permutation, but its heart remained. It wasn't the nuggetization of the chicken or the greasy stick of the sauce. The heart was the way each bite pulls at the pentagram of tastes our tongue can experience. The literal Chinese telephone result of sharp Hunan spice, echoed in Taiwan, stolen to New York and retranslated with a glop of sugar across the great American melting walk. Dice the onion, saute the broccoli, brunoise the carrot, steam the rice. Technique, taste, composition, translation, the General was my first professor. Erin's face was still on my screen when I pressed the tip of the sharpened blade to it. The color shifted around her cheeks like a magical bruise, and then the pixels realigned when I released. Over and over I watched the fireworks explode from her nose and then dissolve as if it never happened. I wondered if the marks I left would be so quick to disappear. When I got done, would she still be smiling? Could she still look me in the eye? Chapter 3, Day 948. Erin's restaurant was on the first floor of a sleek brick and steel building a few blocks from the water. It was part of a burgeoning new development of work loft spaces and felt out of place surrounded by the kitschy porches of liberal arts students and mom-and-pop shops fronted with dilapidated pastel fences. The front window had metallic designer sunglass tints, and the embossed metal sign next to the door read Essen in an aerodynamic font. Below, it said Eat in parentheses, which was the only indication that the door led to a restaurant. Every space along the row had the same minimal signage and zigzagged steel awnings. I approached the entrance a few minutes before 9 a.m., and the bolt knocked in the frame when I pulled on the door, a sure omen to turn back. I knew it was all downhill from here, but I had no idea to what depths of hell the momentum might carry me. I cupped my hands around my eyes like holding binoculars and tried to see through the tint. A man with laser-etched stubble leaned out the doorway to greet me. I raised my brow a few times to try and regain composure. "You here for the interview?" he asked, and I nodded. "Take a seat. The chef will be out in a minute." His voice trailed off as he walked back towards the kitchen with indifference. The edges of my vision pulsed as the front door swung shut and stole the sunlight my eyes were used to. "Thanks. Are you one of the cooks?" I said to annoy him. He turned around and met my eyes one at a time. "Yes." I could tell he hated the way I reduced him to mere cook, an oversimplification of the impossible task of heating different ingredients and arranging them on a plate. "I've been the sous chef here since we opened a year ago, and I'm taking over Halston House as head chef. You're interviewing to be the replacement for whichever cook is promoted." He stopped before going through the kitchen door, and realizing his tone was curt, turned back. "I liked it here. Good luck with the interview." "Good luck to you as well," I replied, and sat down near the espresso-stained host stand. A row of uncomfortable plastic chairs lined the front passageway, bent sheets of white plastic that stood at funny angles. Exposed brick walls were illuminated with black railway lanterns, hung every few feet. Their warmth was accentuated by exposed filament bulbs. I stared at the crooked crosshatch glow inside too long, and it seared into my sight, so I played with the geometric impression by darting my eyes back and forth along the back mirror of the bar, blinking the dazzling lines of light into memories to distract myself from the terror welling deep within me. The floor was covered with farmhouse boards that looked old and hand-scraped, but were probably engineered to look that way. All the tables and chairs sat proudly on top of their polished steel bottoms. It was a tasteful design, a blend of future and familiar. The aesthetic reflected the concept of the menu, which made me uneasy. John knew how to pick 'em. I flicked my head back and forth, trying to catch her scent as preparation. Nothing but the lemon zing of industrial cleaner stuck inside my nose. "Hey, guy," the outgoing cook said through the pass. "The chef will see you now. The office is back here." Panic weighed me down as I walked towards the kitchen, a heavy set of ankle weights that made my feet shuffle and heart tap. My plan to end 1,000 days of grief seemed instantaneously stupid. To waste a year of my life studying and drilling for the opportunity to peel carrots for the person I hated most in this world. I kept my eyes on the floor as I entered her domain. In the kitchen, Erin stood before me, the girl of my nightmares. I took her in. Starting with a turned-out sneaker pointing my direction, I fought the emotional gravity and shame of being there and found my way up to her teeth, which were bared and smiling in 2 almost even rows. She swooped burgundy bangs up behind her ear and locked them down with a pencil and extended her hand towards me like an old friend. There was a moment of eternity between her smile and our hands coming together for the first time. Her eyes were too wide and too green, split kiwi set out on the ledges of high cheeks. She was whippet thin and had a face full of what used to be freckles, stars through a cloudy sky. There, but only if you squint. A belch bubbled in my throat as our hands met, and a phantom shock rippled through my arm and numbed my toes. The wet stick of anxiety clung our fingers together for a beat after the shake was over. "Hi," she said with enthusiasm. "I'm Erin. Welcome to Essen." I was quaking, unable to reply. I stood there like an idiot, dazed. She held up a finger and bounded over to one of the cooks. The only word I heard her say was shit. She bounced back to me. I was still frozen. "I'm really happy you're here. Let's go down to the office to chat." She quacked firm and fast. I wiped sweat from my hand and followed her past the vault door of the walk-in cooler, down, down, down to the basement. Fate threatened my every step as we descended into the fluorescent unknown. I couldn't believe I was doing it. My plan was working, and it was terrifying. "Watch your step. There's some water damage from a flood." The wood buckled under my weight. "Don't worry. We don't keep food down here." I still hadn't spoken, and she seemed fine with it. Selfish bitch. Chunks of razor-cut drywall were stacked thigh-high in the corner and piled with empty beer bottles. A bunch of upside-down vegetable crates were strewn around for seats. The crack house dining set was accompanied by the stench of dry rot. Ironically, I was the one who felt unsafe. At the back of the room was a half-open door flanked with fresh drywall. The walls of Erin's office were unfinished and stuck with an assortment of primary color thumbtacks that held up supplier receipts and credit card statements. Peel and stick plastic clips pinned a mess of computer wires to the wall. I massaged a crack in the floor with the bottom of my shoe. We were alone in the clutter and damp where nobody could hear her scream, or me. I sat between Erin and the door with my arms folded over the knives on my lap, my knees pitched together like a nervous child who'd done something wrong. "So you must be Alex." Erin swept the computer keyboard to the side along with some loose papers and envelopes. Her vim concerned me, so cheery it was suspicious. She put her elbows up on the self-assembled desk and twisted her fingers together like a gang sign. "I'm so sorry. Yes, I'm Alex. I'm really nervous," I said to explain the sweat and silence. "Don't be. If you can't find a job, it's not like it gets cold enough to freeze to death." She snorted at her own joke. I thought about trying to fake a smile, but couldn't manage. It was all too weird. It was like some horror movie was playing through my eyes. None of what was happening had anything to do with Alex Ross. I'd known myself a long time. I hated cooking. I hated confrontation. I was compassionate. I didn't like violence. I was responsible. I was living the exact opposite of everything I thought of as me. I felt disembodied, taken over, an avatar for some other consciousness, one that was mean and vindictive and hateful. I was uneasy about my Pacific Coast transformation, too. New haircut, hip glasses, first suntan. My hair had always been buzzed. Now it was the giant mop of a man without intentions. Hair so long I didn't know where to put it, so I slung it over the top of my head in a piled part. If she'd ever seen a photo of me with John, she'd have seen Office Alex, but the Meet Your Parents Alex was overwritten with a distorted imposter. How could she recognize me? When I looked in the mirror, I didn't recognize myself. Grief Journal, Day 1. When I picked up the phone, I thought I heard static. That the whooshing sound in my ear was wind gushing into an open car window, or the diesel dust cloud of a city bus swirling around the person on the other end of the line. I leaned in to find the voice underneath, sifted through the fuzz. Who's under there? It wasn't static. It was the Doppler effect of wails and panic from the mouth of a courageous young girl as she shifted the phone from ear to ear, heaving whatever air her mouth could find. My handset hissed with each suck and blow. When her lungs could take no more, Lily said it. Those words are still banging around inside my head like a type-faced screensaver that bounces each time it hits the edge of my skull while it searches endlessly for an ear hole to escape from and warble on towards the rest of everyone else. John was shot, over and over, I don't know how many times. He was dead when the cops got there. She shot him, Alex, that girl, the one who could cook, his little sister said, coming together for each sentence, and then falling apart again. I hung on the line and breathed into the mouthpiece with the receiver flipped upside down, unable to listen to Lily's staccato bawl, but needing to let her know I was still there. I'd never see upright John again. A week later, I'd be at a private viewing for Horizontal John. I went because I was invited, not because I wanted to. It seemed disrespectful to not go. When your best friend's mom calls and asks if you want to see the body, you go and see the body. It doesn't matter how many holes it has in it. According to various local news outlets, there were 5 holes, but the only one I could find was on his head, right on his brow line, a fresh metal cowlick. The mortician did a good job trying to conceal it, but the skin changed texture there and became shiny, like a fresh asphalt patch in a worn-out road. I imagine that was the one he thought about most as he lay dying in his living room, as blood welled up into the carpet beneath him. A narcissist even in death, he was worried about how his hair would look in the coffin, hoping the bottom of the part wouldn't do that thing where it ran the wrong direction, like one of those stupid ridgeback dogs. Thankfully it had been trimmed last week, so the color was even. The early seasonings of middle age that cropped up above his ears snipped away. Obsidian hair that bent and stuck. He was 27 years old. Every time I close my eyes, I see his body and his holes. Sometimes it's a smile with no eyes on his belly. Other times, I don't remember. I'm not that smart, but I'm smarter than almost everyone I meet. John was an exception. His offhand comments were more insightful than my revelations. He'd tell me that my certainties were what kept me from being an intellectual. That kind of smart. The kind of smart that makes you double-check your driver's license the next time you type your name, or investigate a career in shoveling compost after getting a bit of shit on your hand wiping your ass. He kept me humble, and I loved that about him. We met in undergrad. We had the same friends. We were interested in the same girls. All of them. He lived down the hall our freshman year, and one day he started sleeping on the futon beneath the cheap pine planks of my lofted bed. It happened organically. He wasn't there, and then he was. After school, we followed each other to Chicago, my homeland. I started my career as an engineer because I was willing to do anything to pay off my massive student loans, and John got his MBA because he didn't know what he wanted to be. After he graduated, I stayed put, and he moved back to Virginia where he'd grown up. I thought once I made it to the big city, I'd never leave. There's real magic in Chicago to someone from its suburbs. Peering down the shoreline on beach day with Mom, I'd want to know what each one of those shapes were in the distance. How could they be taller than the clouds? What kind of voodoo did it take to own one of the windows that looked down upon the sky? I only visited Virginia once, but we kept in touch. We didn't talk on the phone, but we communicated, trading selfies from public toilets and critiquing online photos we found of girls we used to date who either looked much better or much, much worse. We never said anything about the people who stayed the same. The toilet selfie is all about composition. The best ones are from toilets that have mirrors facing the stall door. You need long arms and to understand the rule of thirds to get a compelling shot. John sent me one where he was mid-poop, his red face half winced and half grinned. I used it as a conversation piece. Hey, do you think this guy's really taking a dump? What men we were. True friendship is trading photos from toilets. It's a willingness to be vulnerable and stupid and irreverent in a way that other people can't accept and that you can't accept from other people. It was March the last time we were together. The calendar said spring, but Chicago weather disagreed. Dark clouds spat ice and sleet all night. John was there for some business thing and stayed the weekend. I invited everyone we knew, even people we didn't like, so we'd have somebody to ostracize. I don't know who picked the bar. It was a spaceship decorated as a sports bar and designed for new adults to prove their worth by throwing away money. Each table had a self-service tap with a digital readout. The displays were blocky and had the green backlights of old calculators that were intentionally hard to read. Sober, you had to squint. A surcharge to self-serve. How apropos. The music was so loud that everybody talked but nobody had a conversation. Guys conversed by putting their hands up on each other's shoulders, the girls by giving each other genuine smiles. We were young and beautiful and oblivious and hard to hear but easy to understand. I know it was a good night because I only took one picture, which I still have on my phone. There were about 15 people in it, a collection of half-crocked 20-somethings and a dad. Charlie's dad, our old roommate. We called him Big Charlie because he was a homunculus like his son. There's a pinless moment in our lives, once the motion sickness from the swells of puberty subside, that dads become cool again, though they don't know it. Before they become accepted, they regress to tweens at the middle school dance, awkward and unsure of where to be and how to stand. They don't know if they're one of the tribe or if they should ever show up to one of our gatherings again, but they keep showing up. At tailgates, at birthdays, at get-togethers and bullshit bars downtown because they wanted to see that Dapper John fellow from Virginia that came to stay a week each summer and made a mess cutting his own hair in the bathroom. John, who made up for it by being the only one in the house with the patience to help his wife with the computer. There Charlie's dad is on the far right of the photo, crouching in with hesitation, unsure if he belongs. The guys are dressed casually except for John, who is in a well-cut black suit with a crisp white Oxford, always a suit, never a tie. The rest of us are trying to be hip and failing. A fitted sport coat over a t-shirt with a pocket square. A penny loafer with tassels under slim-fitting purple khakis. The tragedy of a gingham mascot. We'd reached the age where the girls' necklines began to recede from their belly buttons. There was a sense of cleavage, but the angle was no longer so severe that light reached the bottom. The darkness there, the mystery in the middle, was elegant and sexy. The night I heard John was killed, I waited a few hours for the news to plague around and infect our friends before I changed my profile picture to that image. I sat up all night leering into my laptop. My nose crept forward, shoulders rounded, mouth open to breathe, and I devolved into a stacked mass of cotton and confusion. A Neanderthal looking at an eclipse, feeling no pain but breaking my eyes forever. I heard it first from his little sister, sweet wailing Lily, who suffocated on the other end of the line. When the phone rang and I saw her name, I didn't feel a pang. I didn't get the sense that the world I hoped I lived in and the one I actually lived in were about to divide, and when the atoms split, I would have to choose one and be stranded there forever. Chapter 4. Erin held up my resume after digging it out of the mess beneath her hands. A true queen of disaster, she sat tall and dignified over the chaos surrounding her. The ringing in my ears made it hard to hear the lies I'd written as she read them aloud. So you spent 2 years at the Culinary Academy. Very impressive. And worked in the kitchen at Casa de Alma at the same time? Big kitchen. What did you do there? I worked there a week before I was fired. Not because of the fabricated education. Turns out I was a mound of useless shit. They weren't even paying me. That's how bad I was. After 3 months of woodshedding at home, I got a job to find out if I could hack it in a real kitchen. The answer was no. And not because I couldn't cook. I didn't know what the hell anybody was saying, which made every job take twice as long as it should have. Cooks use an immense amount of jargon. Worse than a friend who comes home from the army telling stories with dozens of unexplained acronyms. At least you can guess at those. Cooking jargon makes no sense. How am I supposed to know the food processor is the RoboCop? After getting canned, I sat watching hours of redundant food-related syndications and wrote down every turn of phrase so I could practice them on my dog. Zeke sat in the middle of the kitchen when I cooked, motionless except for his fat head, the tip of his nose a compass pointing in the cardinal direction of possible fallen food. I'd let him know if I were behind him with a hot pan, like the up-and-coming chef who joined the competition to cook his heart out for the autistic nephew he saw twice a year, but sold to the judges as his best friend. It was a stage. I had no prior experience, so I started as a commis. I did a little bit of everything, and eventually settled on roasting and grilling. I've never done pastry, I said. I thought I should be honest. I forced myself to blink a few times in my best impression of a normal human being. Sounded good. All bullshit. Thanks, Internet. What really happened was that my greasy, beyond pretentious boss, who had a tattoo that said pork slut, called me into her office on my 4th shift and told me that my time was over. I was too old and too slow. I told her it was good she spaced the letters out on her arm because when she grew up she could turn that tattoo into park sleuth, and the pig could be the top bloom of an old oak tree. She then suggested I have sex with my own anus, and when I asked her for instructions, she threw a spatula at me. The kitchen is full of colorful and inventive language. None of that brigade shit here, Erin started. We're small and focused. 3 on the line at lunch, 4 or 5 at dinner. The servers plate most of the pastry, except for the fried apple pie. I love those radioactive goo-filled ones from the gas station. Guilty pleasure, I said. Gross, but I shouldn't knock it till I try it. Only the worst kind of person wouldn't have tasted gas station apple pie. The ones for $1 on the end cap. I figured that's what she had in common with John, an obsession for the finer things. On first meeting her, she didn't seem like his kind of girl. There was a crudeness and nonchalance that was unusual for him to appreciate. I'd offer to bring you one, but there are more apples and candy bars and gas stations around here. It's the weather. People like being alive, she said. Where are you from? Chicago suburbs. Corn, football, shoveling snow. A twisted knot of terror pumped around my body with my blood. When my gut calmed, it shook my arm, steadied the arm, and the thigh would spasm. I did my best to maintain eye contact and be pleasant while I chased my mind around my body. Nice. I didn't grow up here either, she said. There was a soft misery in her voice that made me feel better. Erin looked back down at my resume, and her lips shifted to the left side of her face. I don't know how to say this without being rude, she paused. But why are you here? You look about my age, and you have a degree in electrical engineering, which means you're smarter than me. I'm sure you've had other jobs, good jobs, ones that have health insurance. Why food? Moron, stupid, idiot. I started with my actual resume and left the engineering part on because I was too lazy to rewrite the bullet points, those invented little quasi-statistical accomplishments that hiring managers adore. I should have been an art history major that worked as an ultrasound technician, but rerouted my life because I was pathologically afraid of the unborn. Worst of all, a place like this, a place full of free and creative minds, would be in dire need of tech support. The thought of taking a look at someone's computer after a shift made me pick at the ribbon around my knives. Oh, it's not rude. This is like a second life for me. I'm starting over, I said to coax sympathy. I took in a deep breath. I needed a change. Call it a quarter-life crisis. You know, the educated, overpaid crybaby isn't happy having every advantage in life, so he turns his world upside down to cook eggs on the other side of the country, I said and laughed. The bigger the lie, the more likely people are to believe it. Lies have a way of manipulating themselves into truths. Devoting your life to food seemed so meaningless to me when a ham sandwich was easy to make and tasted just fine. How could a life dedicated to worshipping turnips and bones make anyone feel like anything but a fraud? My grandma knew how to extract goodness from the scraps to stay alive, not garner a decent review. Then there was all the pageantry and pretension that went way beyond respecting dead animals and into the realm of delusion. I figured it wouldn't take too many comments from Erin about foraged mushrooms to get up the rest of my nerve and end this experiment. Fungus is always foraged, just like corn chips are always gluten-free. Good for you. You have no idea how much I get that, pushing the reset button, she said. In my fantasy, resetting my life meant clicking the little menu at the bottom of the screen. When Erin wanted to shake things up, she ripped the cord out of the wall and then told everyone that the wall made her do it, that it humiliated and hit her. You aren't functioning properly, Erin. I think you need to be reset. I know I don't have the years of experience you're expecting, but I feel I make up for it with familiarity with your food. Oh? I've watched the menus since the position was posted, and it's like we had the same Oma. My mom's parents were both German immigrants, with the accents and the lederhosen, the whole deal. A lot of the dishes are riffs on things I've eaten since I was a kid. I think it's brilliant the way you're reimagining those old foods, honestly. I leaned into that last word, wrapped it around her like a loving boyfriend picking you up at the airport after 2 weeks apart. I think you're brilliant. That's great, Erin said. My family is similar, not the boat and accents, but my roots are to Ireland and Eastern Europe, so I was trying to pay homage to the past. My last restaurant was refined, complex cuisine. I wanted to get away from technique-driven food and do a comforting and approachable menu. We haven't been open that long, but people keep showing up, so that's a good sign. She was happy with her life. Her grin was a punch to the belly, and her laugh a slap on the cheek. The back and forth drug on. I made up answers to her questions, and she fidgeted in her chair like she was there to kill me. Enough talk, let's see you cook, she said, and wall-walked around the tiny gap between her desk and my legs. The back of her knees washed past the front of mine like our patellae were natural spoons. She reached back through the doorway and snapped up my hand so fast I didn't have time to feel sick to my stomach. She led me upstairs with leaps and hops. A small, middle-aged man worked at a side table in a spotless white apron. He slapped a whole bass on the counter and filleted it with a few flicks from a knife with duct tape on the handle. The meat went into a tray and the body into a white bucket. Make me a memory, Erin said, but one that fits the menu. She walked around inspecting the prep work at different stations, prodding and squeezing to make sure it was up to her standards. Miguel will help you find whatever you need. The walk-in is back by the stairs. There are reach-ins and a few drawers with seafood and other proteins. Don't go crazy. A bite is all I'll need to know if you're my guy. Bring it down to the office when you're done. She shimmied off in black slacks so tight they looked painted on. Instinct forced me to gaze at her ass. The mammalian brain was immediately superseded by the vicious reptile below. A snarl flew from my mouth and 2 thunderclaps of "fuck" and "you" leapt out. I knew she'd be pretty. Pretty I was prepared for, but sincere was a different kind of animal to bait. Miguel barely noticed my snort. Men are hard to alarm when they're holding weapons. Hey man, is she always this nice? When we're closed. He lowered his eyes at me. I figured. I unreeled my knives on the closest table and looked back to Miguel for approval. He didn't give a fuck about my steel. He was snap-cleaning bass with a broken putty knife better than I'd ever be able with the best vanadium steel razor blade. Make her a memory, she said. One day she'll taste all the bad inside me, but today I dug around my head for something good for Erin to eat. I was half expecting her to ask for something sexy. In my experience, that's what food was about. In my 4 days cooking for the pork slut, she must have asked for it to be more sexy 100 times. How literal was that tattoo? Did she eat a fat chop and sleep with the first guy who made eye contact at the bar? Or did she need bacon fat to be rubbed on her lady bits to get turned on? If pork got in there, it would wreak havoc. A pork slut with toxic shock syndrome. Now that's a food show I would watch. I don't know why foodies my age continue to apply the sexy moniker to savory dishes. The whipped cream manufacturer, I get their innuendo. At least if you go down that road, your crotch only gets sticky, not rotten. I thought a long while what to serve her. Erin was accomplished and educated. She'd spot any weakness in my technique if I presented her a refined plate. Taste was always most important to me, but paying customers care about plating and knife work. I had to cook something so simple it appeared audacious, yet impossible for me to screw up. She mentioned Irish heritage during the interview and looked half the part, with that almost auburn hair and a possible freckle or two. I wanted to use a russet potato because I hoped some percentage of her genetics wired tubers to the happy part of her head. A perfect potato salad, that's what I would serve. Kartoffelsalat to High Germans. Grundbeersalat to my hillbilly family. Groundberries, that's what my ancestors called them. No wonder I turned out this way. 4 ingredients. A russet potato, white vinegar, cured pork, and a yellow onion. I dug through the vegetable bins to find the perfect potato and washed it well because Erin didn't need any more grit. The rest of the ingredients were prepped while the chunks of starch boiled. There was an aged white vinegar that tasted pretty good from the bottle, which meant like a mouthful of nickels. Every other vinegar tastes great by itself. Some of the aged balsamics are so sweet you can put them on ice cream. My grandmother used a plastic jug of 99-cent vinegar for potato salad. She kept it under the sink because she used it to clean her collection of brass seals more often than to cook. Her potato salad was amazing, but there was a giant tin of MSG emblazoned with a golden dragon hidden above the stove that I'd caught her digging in one Thanksgiving. I diced the onion in an even row of decent chops. It wasn't perfect technique, but I was getting better at the fundamentals. My knife holder was fanned in front of me. I ran my fingers down the row of handles like piano keys and stopped at the small, hook-nosed paring knife. I slid it into my front pocket with onion-sweat fingers. In the cooler there was both slab and jowl bacon. I squeezed and sniffed them. Both had a rich, smoky aroma, but the slab looked really lean, so I lopped off chunks of both, diced them up, and threw them into a hot pan with a bit of avocado oil to get them going. Potato salad isn't a recipe so much as it's a method. Blend these ingredients together until it tastes right, measuring verboten. Too sour? Add more bacon fat and potatoes. Bland? Add salt and bacon. Not enough bacon? Add more bacon. Enough bacon? Add more bacon. I got it all together in a ribbed white ramekin and let the raw onion mellow into the vinegar while the bacon fat cooled and emulsified into a paste with the starch from the potatoes. I fingered the flat top of the blade in my pocket as I waited for the mixture to be 10 seconds from perfect. The tiny bowl was enough for 2 or 3 bites. I rushed it down to Erin, remembering to skip the rotten stare. Here you go. A perfect potato salad. This is the real deal, like Oma taught me. That whole kitchen and you give me a potato? She looked up from her computer where everything had been put back into disarray. It better be amazing. Erin held the ramekin out with both hands like it was the cup of Christ, and then sucked up the aroma with her eyes closed. She looked demonic when she peered back at me through the wavering steam, the heat seeming to radiate from her skin and not the bowl. Erin's plain wording started me digging at my pocket. She liked my nerve, and now I wanted to see hers. Not because of what she was, but because of what she wasn't. I didn't have her full reaction, but if I got a sense of displeasure, I was going to take the sharp little bird from my pocket and dig it around the bottom of her throat, right where the committed smokers get the trach ring. I'll deflate her voice so fast, Fishmonger Miguel won't hear a peep when I go to work. I'll dig my fingers around the hole while tendons in her neck strain together like the gums of a calf searching for mother's milk. In full mount, I'll demand to know what really happened that night, and as she struggles to learn to breathe again, I'll cover the hole with my left hand so she can huff out muffled responses. When I run out of questions, or she runs out of answers, I'll gut her with my right. This is what food should be, simple and delicious, she turned her phrase with a darted glance. Erin shooed me from the office while validation stirred me into a vortex. I love it. Thanks for coming in. I'm seeing a few more people today, but I'll be sure and let you know the moment I make a decision. You did good. The food fits, she said, and left me at the front door with my hand in my pocket, flicking dirt from under my thumbnail with the tip of the knife. I wanted to scream and grin, go fetal, then do 72 burpees. My abs tensed, and my face became stuck in a loop of very near expressions. I'd been in a deep hole for so long, walking and talking, but ever thinking about making the dead. The only good those last 3 years, the only light I'd seen had been from the shade. This was a small moment of sunshine, catching the rays between skating white clouds far off in the distance as they amble towards you and steal the light again. Chapter 5. The sun blinded me when I walked out of Essen, but I didn't bother to try and shield my eyes. Being in the light wasn't something I was used to, so I didn't know how to react. In the car, the paring knife ripped through my pocket when I sat and poked me in the belly. The slash turned the world into a silent film, and I dug around my torso, searching for holes. Car running, nowhere to run. I fiddled with the radio buttons, settling on subterranean homesick blues. This madness needed a method. I could have paid a vagrant to drag Erin into the alley after a late night at the restaurant and stab her or rape her and kill her and stab her, but that's not what I wanted. Vengeance, sure, but filed and notarized. Death was too light a penalty. I'd feel better once she suffered, and I knew she deserved it. I thought that once I got to her, the sundering would be easy, so I didn't bother to plan it. This wasn't in my character. I always planned everything. My digital calendars were synced across all my devices. It was Friday, and the blue block in my phone's appointment book that said interview had just passed. What followed was blank white space. Every time I tried to schedule my life post-interview, I was overcome by the vastness of every possible tragedy for both of us. Follow your instincts. You'll know what to do. Nobody told you to hold your breath when you were baptized. I was wrong, and I knew it the moment the sun hit my face, the moment the hook knife pecked my stomach, when my hands jiggled on and off the scorch of the steering wheel. I knew it yesterday, and now, and tomorrow. What lay ahead was going to be hardest, coaxing out my inner fiend. The comics I read growing up made vengeance look fun. The alien man hero swooped down on top of the bridge, wagged a one-liner from his brick chin about the value of humanity, and melted the evil genius with his laser death eyes. I'd cheer from my bed sheeted with his super face while the bad guy screamed. They weren't superheroes, they were serial killers. My hands shook on and off the flaming wheel, palms thumping like a dog trying to find an itch with his back foot. Do I know she's guilty? I hear John's voice in my head telling me how dangerous my certainties are. How I'm getting too old to be so certain about everything. While I turned up the radio to drown out my thought, the historian in my head was reading my updated biography. I've abandoned my career, squandered my savings, and alienated everyone important to me to get here, and now I have no idea where to go. I ruined my life to ruin another. My head was on the wheel, fighting for air. Breathe. The monster's hand was like my hand was like your hand. Breathe. Messy, unprofessional, but human. Breathe, I told myself. The heat inside the car forced me out onto the sidewalk, and I blazed down a path towards the water to cool off. I was looking for something, I don't know what. A plan, a place to think, a beer maybe. After a few blocks, the houses and businesses morphed back into the stereotypical California character I'd come to enjoy. There were pastel bungalows with white gates and student rentals with faded thrift shop couches on the porch and empty wine bottles in the yard. My head got lighter as the stench from the bay got stronger. There was a small park by the water filled with filthy, dreadlocked teens and their rucksacks. Packs of these latchkeys roved the coastline all the way up to the redwoods. They were a homogeneous group of dirt-smudged kids who differentiated themselves with different colored bandanas and mutts. I didn't understand their plight. They chose to be homeless. Where I came from, homelessness wasn't a choice, it was an affliction. Real homeless people are hidden down ominous alleyways near open dumpsters. Their hands are covered in shit and they argue alone in the dark. Those honest homeless are hardest to coin because they don't have a cup for change. They ate it to stay alive. A small bookstore was across from the park, and I went in to look around. It was a craftsman-style house that sat under a low-pitched roof whose chimney was missing several stones. The pillars on the patio were boxcar red, and all sorts of flyers and advertisements were stapled to them. A punk rock show from last week. A liberal judge asking for a vote. Free kittens. Inside the house-turned-shop were sections for books new and used, in the bedroom to the left according to the chalkboard sign. I went to the stationery section, and a small, white-haired man in a t-shirt, sporting a hideous purplish painting of a zombie, asked me if I needed help. I liked art. I'd seen that painting. It lived in Chicago like me, but I couldn't remember the name. I'm looking for a notebook, but I want something special, I said. A notebook for something more than notes. How on the notes? He said, touching his nose and thinking he was clever. This is what you need, young man. It can be carried through many adventures. He handed me a beaten leather journal. The pages inside were tacky and new, but the outside looked like it was made from roadkill. It smelled like a hard day's work. You know, he said, I went to high school with a leather worker. All the leather is from found objects, sometimes in the trash. He pointed half his face at me and raised his brow for approval. Local leather. Great. Everything had to be local. You've got to support local garbage picking. This journal was worth $60 because the guy who made it was less than 10 miles away. I bought it anyways, even though I didn't like his hokey buzzword mentality. Back outside, I settled in on the farthest park bench from the dirty squadron of kids and got to work. I started writing, but scratched it out. My penmanship suggested idiocy or mild retardation. I only had a vague recollection of the world without computers, a more difficult time to get places and talk to each other, a time when you had to talk to each other about getting places. The air of mystery must have made the world more exciting. The days when men were men because there were no videos of them at 16, getting hit in the nuts with a wiffle bat on a lost bet. Wondered what my friends would think if they knew I was sitting beneath a tree, pen in hand, trying to plot the destruction of another. If I lost control and they caught me, I'd blame TV or video games, or some combination of devices with digital displays. All those little arrays of colored boxes I was looking at made me blind to morality, obscured in high definition. Premeditated murder wasn't a setting I could switch off. I asked grief counselor Tim if planning Erin's death in my head was a phase, a limp I could walk off with time and professional assistance. Tim told me to write it all down, and I wish I'd listened because then I could use the notes. All I remembered were years of hurt and rage, no thoughts, only a lingering seed in the back of my head. I kept notebooks around the house, but they all ended up becoming food journals. A paragraph of pain followed by 10 pages of techniques to drill or equipment to research. Random words I didn't understand filled the margins. Confit, sous vide. All the energy I put into cooking was really a fancy form of procrastination. Now that I saw her, I felt moved to try and finish what I'd started. Erin was living her dream on blood money. Blood I can't seem to get out of my head or the carpet when my eyes find some. I should slow down. No more knives in the pocket. Research, calculate, execute. That's how things get done. Slow down. Take her bite by bite. Savor this opportunity. The head should be eaten last. That was assuming I got the job. If not, I needed an alternate route. I began writing. Plan B. If I don't get the job, I'll book a flight out of this mild-weathered nightmare and stop off to stab her in the heart on my way to the airport. Under the sun, way out west, I wrote that line and then knotted the leather strings together. The time for hurt was up for the day, and I had to go on living my life. I stretched my legs and clasped my hands behind my head as the gulls squawked on the nearby railing. My phone buzzed. Charlie sent me a video from work. His raspy voice repeated, "Ma'am, ma'am," from behind the phone, which was pointed at a thick-hipped woman who was trying to pet a roadside elk. The noble beast bowed its head to greet her, and then flung her 10 feet with a rocket jerk. Charlie fought back laughter as he ran over, asking if she was all right. "Ma'am? Ma'am?" His voice pitched up a step with each repetition of the word. I watched it 6 times, laughing harder each time and drawing more stares from the dirty kids who wished they had cell phones. Losing John meant losing Charlie, too. The replacement. I couldn't tell him what I was doing. He'd want to help. It wasn't much of a plan, but it was a start. If I got the job, it might be fun to piss in the soup. Besides, she was happy. I couldn't have that. A humane hunter shoots the deer bounding merrily through the reeds. I'll put a terror in her heart before a bullet. My hair was long enough to get windswept, and I almost fit in. No reason to waste that. I'll bum around the coastline on my days off, eating street meats from food trucks and watching my dog get frustrated as he tries to bite the waves. There's no hurry. I didn't have to kill her today. I could do it a little at a time. Kill the things she loved. Unless she had a cat. I wasn't a fucking psychopath. The restaurant would be an easy kill. Things in the digital age live forever. People don't want to try new things. They want to try things that other people like. A bad review, an unfortunate happening in the local news. It wouldn't take much to keep people away. Empty is a type of dead. Couldn't do that first, not if I got the job. Once the restaurant died, it would be hard to stay in her life. But if I don't get the job, I could spend my time killing it, rather than Erin. Take it slow, enjoy the sunshine. I was confusing myself. So I got some amazing fish tacos and drank until I passed out. Grief Journal, Day 8. Now that John was dead, I needed a replacement friend. Not someone to commiserate with, but someone to be on my team and take my side, even if it didn't make any sense. Guys pretend to love their friends equally. The truth is I don't even like some of my friends. The dull lights in my best friend constellation are necessary. Corporations need janitors. Except Jason. He's a moron. Charlie and Hank met me at the hotel when they got to Richmond. My room looked down on Capitol Square. It's a city that works so hard to remind you of the past that it doesn't look like it has a future. Colonial river cities are cockeyed and tough to navigate. A grid of modern co-work spaces and coffee shops are retrofit on top of horse paths. A few stubborn, crooked streets meander through the graft to confuse everyone who visits. The 3 of us went for dinner at Alt Bar down one of those gnarled chutes the night before John's funeral. I'm sure the guys who weren't invited were jealous. Funerals create a strange culture where the ancillary mourners jockey for positions next to the truly bereaved. I picked the restaurant based on their website, which told me they served steak and had a cavernous dining room. When guys go out with other guys, it isn't about mouth pleasure, it's about atmosphere. Women want to feel secluded when they eat. Men want to feel important. The hip food, the flash food, was being made around the corner at 5155, where Erin was the chef. It was hailed as a gastronomic revolution, and a sick part of me wanted to taste her ideas as a way to try and put some of her mind in my mouth and understand why she'd taken my friend. At that point, Erin was being held at the county jail without bail. I remember calling 5155 to make a reservation, and I figured I'd play dumb if I was found out. What made me hang up the phone was thinking about the way Hank and Charlie would react if Erin's name was printed somewhere inside. Charlie is short. All his nerves and feelings are twice as close together as the rest of us, so his reactions are fast and ill-thought. He has the disposition of a dog that fits in a purse. The world is taller than him, so he pretends he isn't scared of anything. Charlie is loyal like a dog, too. He even brought me a guy's shoe once after an altercation outside a bar. I didn't ask. Charlie was the kind of guy who'd grab everyone's menus and use them as kindling to set the restaurant on fire. Hank is more measured and sadistic. If you upset Hank, he'd send our group a picture of a wrinkled old lady being violated by a dog from behind and edit the head with a smiling photo of your mom. His kind of fire wouldn't be a hissy fit in the middle of the dining room. He'd call it a night back at the hotel and then chuck a flaming brick through the front window. At breakfast, he'd say he slept great. John sat at 5155's bar on weeknights and sent us photos of Erin's creations. Each picture had a caption about the dish and the science behind it. This was unfucking believable because until he dated that girl, I never saw him eat anything but hamburgers. Bread, meat, mustard. If it had tomato, he'd send it back. Mayonnaise, and he'd lose his mind and address the server with words only he thought were insults, like public schooled. He called Erin's mozzarella souffle with 30-year balsamic to die for. I wanted to know if he was right, so after everyone left, I stayed an extra day and ate there. The food didn't help me understand her any better, and the restaurant enraged me. Fancy eateries get away with the most loathsome shit, like using single words to encapsulate dishes. I wasn't sure what I ordered because the more food cost, the fewer words they used to describe it. I ordered something called scallops, which tasted great, but didn't have any scallops. They were mushrooms instead. Why is that legal? Probably because the law doesn't give a shit about people who pay $200 for dinner. Probably because the law shouldn't. When the three of us arrived at Alt Bar, they tried to seat us at a low table in the middle of the fray, but I demanded a booth along the wall. It's uncomfortable to have a waiter snaking around the table while he balances a tray of dirty plates over your head. In its former life, Alt Bar was a charming haunt for locals where kids ate pizza and carved their names into the thick planks that lined the back of the banquettes. The good old days when you could give a kid a knife in public. Now it was a gastropub. The owners kept the yesteryear shtick, but the aromas were futuristic. Acidity, burnt spice, and resin swirled through the air, and I wondered how many people carved into our booths were still with us, and did NM still heart CG? "It's good to see you guys," Hank said, then after a pause, "You know what I mean. Cheers." He clinked his beer glass to mine. Hank was handsome, like a plastic action hero. That was what he brought to our group. You never see a bunch of absurdly handsome guys together, but every binding of brothers gets at least one. They create opportunities in a way normal people can't. Good-looking people don't have to suffer the true nature of others, so their optimism and wonder is never eroded. "I missed you guys," Charlie said and brought in his pint. "To John," I joined. "We miss you and we love you." The realization why we were there pulled our heads down in a sweet, sad moment of silence. "Did we ever meet this girl? The chef?" Hank asked. Up to his last moments, you needed to qualify which girl you were talking about with John. The one who thinks gluten is the devil, the one who came to the ballpark, the one who doesn't believe in aspirin. He wasn't a conquistador or anything like that. John would have married at 17 if he found the girl with the perfect teeth and perfect mind and family and school and whatever else. He was convinced the one was out there, so he kept looking, trying out this one or that for a bit, and always ending up disappointed over some inane detail. Some of the stuff he said about girls over the years was so funny. "She said literally 5 times at dinner, Alex. 5. How could I possibly see her again?" "She and I aren't going to work. She wore open-toed shoes, and there was something wrong with her second toe. It was crooked and just as long as the big toe. Extrapolate that out genetically. I'll wait. I never met her, I said. Jean sent us more pictures of food than the girl. I read through the appetizers again. It was nice to see him eating vegetables, Hank said. Alex, he only sent food pics because you'd freak out every goddamn time, Charlie said. I hate to see someone go down that road, treating goat cheese like divinity, I said. Charlie slapped the drink menu out of my hands. The gorilla silkscreen on his t-shirt leered at me while bending a barbell. I dared not ask him which fitness religion it was the mascot of. I ordered the Kobe beef pad see ew, even though I knew it wasn't going to be real Kobe beef. This is so fucking tragic, Hank said. Egg yolk dripped off the edges of his delicious-looking brisket sandwich. Your food? Charlie said. The circumstance. I don't think we're grieving the right way with the feast. It's hard to make sense of something that doesn't make any sense, I said. The judge denied that bitch's request for a bond reduction yesterday, Charlie said. At least she isn't getting out before they put her away for life. Charlie got a hanger steak and zucchini. It was dipped in some kind of volcanic pepper puree that made me wish I'd ordered it too, but Charlie went first, and two people can't order the same thing. They can't be buying this self-defense bullshit, Hank said when she figured out how to bite a sandwich with an egg on it. None of the shots to John were fatal on their own, but Erin let him flop around in the living room for a while before he bled out and then called the cops. He flapped and flapped his arms to try and fly away from the madness, and I regret seeing the crime scene photo of the tilted maroon angel he'd left in the carpet. 27 minutes. That's how long she waited to call the police. 1 for each year he was alive. John was the only guy I've ever known not to throw a punch, I said, and looked back at Charlie's hanger steak like it was the prettiest girl in the bar. It was hard to accept that John's tense had changed. This realization sent an uncomfortable bubble of grief up my throat, which fermented the water on my tongue. The Duke had us to do his punching, Charlie said, with chipotle lips. He could do more damage with words than fists, Hank said. That might be worse. That was John's nickname, the Duke. The Duke didn't live in a house. He lived on an estate. He demanded that everyone use the proper words for everything, even the plastic tips on the ends of shoelaces. Aglets. It would have been annoying, but when he corrected you, it felt like he was trying to make you a better person. What would you do, I said to everyone, if she got off? It was for the sake of conversation supposition, morbid curiosity about the impossible. Charlie sat up straight. Got out on bond, or do you mean let go? Hank looked over to me for confirmation. Found not guilty and loosed, I said. She did it. She said she did it. It was open and shut. This was wild speculation. The liquid around Charlie's eyes shook like he was being electrocuted. I turned my gaze towards Hank. She'd have to go, Hank said, eyes deadlocked with mine. I could help plan it, fund it even, but I couldn't do it. Fuck, you don't think that's possible, do you, Alex, that they let her go? Charlie said, his voice creaking. No, Charles, she isn't getting out. You know I'd do it, he said. I'd snap her fucking neck. Right then, Charlie became my new best friend. We drank the place closed, our butts and backs planted on tilted Kilroys and carved hearts. Hiccuping laughter followed rage, followed introspection. Hank made friends with a nice young lady at the hotel who gave us a few rocks glasses from behind the closed bar, and we sat in a lobby alcove drinking blended scotch Hank stowed in his suitcase. I was too drunk or sad to tell them how stupid scotch was. There was a pewter-rimmed chessboard on the coffee table between us, and we took turns accidentally knocking over the stone pieces, chipping at them bit by bit. When the slate king cracked in half, I left him on his side so he could rest. The same as every other day, the sun rose in the east, but today I was awake to bear witness. With the sunrise came a black car to deliver us to evil so I could bid farewell to my best friend. Charlie made it 6 steps into the church before he was overcome. Snot and spit rained from his face as he fought for balance. Hank and I went with the family to view the body. When we came out, Charlie was gone. I helped push the casket out to the front of the church, between the front pews for a receiving line. Hundreds of people were outside in the late summer rain, waiting to come in and say goodbye. Maybe it was 1,000. They snaked through the seats where the kitschy poster board collages were peppered in, homemade pit stops to practice mourning before the main stage. 9-year-old John took a proud knee in his red and white striped baseball uniform. His first bluegill snatched out of a sun-washed lake in the Adirondacks. Graduation day. The sobs echoed into the church from the outside, doors propped open by the crowd gently fighting to get out of the rain and coil through the aisles like at an amusement park, eager for their turn to go on the worst ride of all time. Tears relented if someone saw themselves in a photo with John, and they pointed to show anyone nearby. At the end of the pews was the casket. Some gave prayers, a few spoke to John, but most stood there and wept and moved on. John's grandparents were the first to greet people leaving the coffin. They didn't look like a match set. I thought they might be sole survivors from opposite sides of the family stuck together by age. Their warmth and calm wasn't enough to settle the 1,000 hearts that had to face John's younger siblings. 2 boys and a girl, so beautiful and so broken. Marionettes of grief, they each moved in jerks, one more than the others. They didn't want to be there consoling strangers. They were the ones who needed consolation. The oldest, Lily, a perfect reflection of her mother at 19. The youngest boy, Stephen, a taller version of his father. And the middle child, Jeffrey, a fitting composite. Their will to survive the day inverse to their age. Lily was motionless, huddled with her brothers in a black mass. It was Lily that told me, and now I wondered how they divided up the chore. Mom and Dad were next in line. Mr. Bray said a quiet thanks under his breath and shook the hand of every man with a firm right hook, and then brought his left hand over the top to squeeze both together in a way that made you feel a little bit better for yourself and worse for him. His tie was pulled to the side to hide a coffee stain. He stood there all afternoon, tipped slightly to 1 o'clock and trying his best to hold himself up on quivering knees that needed to sit down. Mrs. Bray was a gale wind of tenacity and dignity. She wore the perfect black dress that acknowledged part of her was dead, but had the right lace accents to say what was left would live on. She cried softly, yet happily, as she embraced every person that walked by. If she knew you, she would throw her arms around your waist so hard that her hands would clap together in the middle of your back. If she didn't, she would clamp your shoulders, forcing you to stand up straight and ask you your name. Then she would look into your heart through your eyes and tell you how much she loved you for being a part of her son's life. Then in a giant swoop, she'd bring you to her chest and wrap you up in the kind of hug you had forgotten could exist, a hug you only remember in watercolors when you fell off your bike hard for the first time and your mom washed it all away with an enormous scoop of her arms. She did this for hours without once wavering in her sincerity. I wanted so badly to run to the back of the line, time and time again, so I could cry like all the others. I wished I had gotten the chance for John's mom to wrap me up and wring me dry. Maybe then I wouldn't feel so empty. Chapter 6, Day 956. The phone ding-dong messages at me from somewhere below my bed. Blind, I swatted at it with a top sheet twisted around my face and only one sock on. The paisley curtains above the headboard were the exact size of the window. Morning sun leaked in every edge, trying to burrow into my head and set it on fire. I spent a good while ignoring the beeps and contemplating the cost of a new mattress if I pissed myself. The thought of being covered in urine, even my own, was enough to stir me upright. The bedside lamp was a cane to get halfway to standing. My breath left a sticky soot on my lips when I yawned. Ding-dong. Another message hit the phone while I was in the bathroom. I'd gone out to celebrate the job Erin offered me after the follow-up interview. I saved whiskey for very happy or very sad occasions. This was both, and I drank accordingly. Bourbon mornings feel like organ rejection. I tried to sit well-postured and mysterious at the end of a nice bar with 3 fingers and hoped a pretty girl might ask what ailed me. I'd buy her a Riesling and ask her to tell me everything about herself, and then try to listen long enough to get laid. Girls sense that kind of desperation. Nobody but the bartender made eye contact with me. The worst thing a man can be is lonely. The second worst thing is unavailable. Miraculously, I was both. I spent the entire night drunk slumped in a dark corner reading texts from Charlie about how to avoid being eaten by a bear, when to lay down and cover your head, when to stand your ground. He went on, and then told me it had been 100 years since anyone had seen a grizzly bear in this state, so he changed the subject to sharks. Charlie was the son of a cop, and the grandson of a cop, but some metric at the academy said he wasn't stable enough to manage people, so he managed wildlife instead. Charlie was better off with the badgers as a game warden or whatever, up in Oregon. He yapped at me from the middle of the least important stakeout ever, hiding in riverside bushes trying to catch salmon poachers. I guess rogue fishermen don't concern themselves with glowing shrubbery. Eggs sizzled in the pan as I dug through the bottom of the refrigerator for a can of fizzy water. Eggs do a nice job of quelling a hangover if you cook them like steak. Fry them 10 seconds on each side in a screeching pan, then drown them in hot sauce. Eggs are the only food you can put a condiment on, or can be the condiment. Flat iron steak slathered with egg yolk and paprika is one of the best meals ever. You'll never see that on a menu. No fad garnishes or complicated techniques to market. Charlie's yammering scrolled by while I ate breakfast. Charlie. Got my ticket this morning. See you in a few weeks, Broheim. I was lonelier drunk than sober, and had begged him to visit. I didn't need to lie about my location to friends or family. I did computer stuff for a living as far as they were concerned, and Northern California was the land of computer stuff. If Erin had hidden herself in Paducah, Kentucky, then it would have been harder to explain while I was there. When someone asked me what I did at work, I'd suck my teeth and think about how my nested life was easier to explain with code. I designed the machines that made the machines that replace people willing to trade time for money. How meta. Then I'd tell them, I work with computers. Alcohol is a compression drug. It turns you into the old-timey photo version of yourself. All the complexity and fine detail you used to hide vanishes. I told Charlie I couldn't wait. It was nice to have something to look forward to rather than something to avoid. His visit was a solid object in the distance I could focus on and walk towards in the wasteland of my life. It felt great to open up my calendar and block off a bit of time that I knew was going to be good. Fill the digital void that made me feel so empty. Charlie was coming in a month, so until then I'd investigate, note her weaknesses. The discovery period, every day for 1 month. I typed it in, then Charlie would come and I'd get a break. Erin messaged me too. Erin. It's Sunday supper showdown, dun dun dun, and you're invited. Text me back for details. She was so likable. So was Ted Bundy. I messaged her back. I don't know what that means. Sounds weird. When? The texted me back bubbles instantly appeared at the bottom of the screen. Right now. We need ingredients. We need a menu. I'll explain on the way. Where do I pick you up? I threw my phone on the table, annoyed at the lack of punctuation. My heart beat in my throat. I threw on a dirty shirt from the hamper and went outside to let the dog pee. It wasn't quite noon, but Annie already had a scotch and soda tilt. Her eyeshadow was the exact same color as the flowers she was watering. Don't let him go on the hydrangeas, Annie said. Her knuckles were knotted with oversized chunks of gold that gleamed in the morning light. I know. How's the job search coming? Hate to see a man in his undies in the middle of the day. I think I may have found something, but don't worry, you'll get your rent either way. I smiled and went back down into my hole. Chapter 7. Erin pulled up a while later in a red Jeep with no doors. Her hair was twisted up and a number 2 pencil was shoved through the knot. Her face no longer startled me, but thankfully I only had to look at it when she was making noise. I hope you like meaningless cooking competitions, Erin said when I got in. Only if we bet fingers. What about jobs? She said. I always wanted to fight prospective cooks like chickens in the old country, but I'm too afraid I'll get sued. The rag top was stuffed on the floor of the back seat. The breeze squeegeed water from my showered head down my neck. Which old country? I said. I have no idea, she snorted. It's too late now. You think you would have won? She really found herself funny. Maybe. The sun glared at me, knowing I was up to no good. I couldn't tell if I was sweating or just wet. I cut my hand in the wind and held steady in the resistance. Erin's bun jiggled. The pencil speared through it ticked a drum solo on the headrest. I wondered what she meant by competition. When I wasn't cooking, I was watching cooking shows. The one where the big-time chefs dueled semolina against potato gnocchi, and the ones where fledgling cooks had to make an entire entree out of peppermints, swordfish, and beets. All of them. It doesn't teach you anything about food, but it's addictive. I'd get caught up even though I didn't have a team in the game, excited because someone had to lose. You didn't have to do this, you know. What we're doing is like my weirdo version of game night. We'd been in the car for 15 minutes, and I had no idea what we were doing. Erin chit-chatted away, It didn't matter how nervous or awkward I was because she didn't need anyone to entertain her. She laughed at her own jokes and answered her own questions if there was more than a breath of silence. It was a long way back into town. I lived in the cheap seats, 30 minutes east of the bay. The dot-commers looking for more room to stretch their legs had started to work their way out into the farmland, supplanting the vegetables with houses as big as the lots. I thought we should get to know each other in an informal setting. Things sometimes get nasty during service. I've lost some good cooks by being too fussy. A chef with a temper. That's original, I said. I didn't care if she was pleasant or a tyrant. Being near her felt like the day after food poisoning. My body was rejecting her, and also my mind. My subconscious couldn't come to terms with the lengths I was willing to go to tear someone apart. It's easy to buy a package of meat in the supermarket, but not everyone can chop the head off a live bird, no matter how hungry they are. Erin pulled into a Mexican grocer. Every few weeks we have these silly competitions. There's always a bet, and it's usually friendly. Loser serves the winner and their friends a nice meal or whatever, but this week is different. How's that? I fucking hate the other chef. I've seen this show, and a million variations. The stadium kitchen, the battling chefs. It was a dream almost come true. The grocery store was a brick box at the bottom of a steep hill. The side was plastered with a vivid graffiti mural of Mexican farmhands tending the fields. Inside hung a chandelier with dusty plastic peppers hanging where there once were candles. It looked like an old saloon where the long deli counter took the place of a bar. A plump, coffee-haired woman in a red and white checkered apron seared meat in a cast-iron skillet with her back to me. The air was filled with dry chili and burnt cumin. A small line formed to the right of a handwritten sign. Meat tacos, $1. How do you decide who wins or what to cook? I asked. Distracted by the excitement of the competition, our conversation became organic, almost normal. It's at my house. I pick the theme. It could be a regional style or a country or just a word. Like Italian? Yeah, but it could also be barbecue. Erin tugged at two grocery carts that wouldn't come apart. Shit. I reached in and turned the plastic buckle from the child's seatbelt to free the carts. We wound through the aisles. Erin interrupted her own explanations with wide-eyed epiphanies, followed by furious grabs at foodstuffs. So, you make something based on the theme? Pops and sizzles buzzed in the distance, and the smell of seared flesh and crushed spices waved up and washed down into each aisle's valley. No, by chance. Everyone writes down an entree, and it's luck of the draw. We make any appetizer we want to pair with the dish. No desserts. Why? I interrupted. Erin was up on her tiptoes, reaching for crushed tomatoes. I grabbed 2 cans over her back, making sure our bodies didn't touch. Dessert isn't real cooking. Shit tastes great if you put enough sugar on it. Every ingredient a savory chef is told not to rely on is a staple of pastry. The worst cake in the world can make someone happy. Creating smiles out of asparagus takes real talent. Chefs had a hierarchy for everything, even themselves. I provide the pantry. That's why we're buying all this stuff. If there's one lemon, then we split it. No bullshit sabotage. She tossed 4 cans of black beans into the cart. What's the theme? Tex-Mex. It's interpretable. What do you think it means? Fajitas, shredded cheese, chili, I said. You can turn anything into a taco. What if they ask us to make tacos? Erin said. Tacos get turned into salad, obviously. And if it's taco salad? She said, laughing. She was charming, and I hated it. Her looks were easy to deal with. The only way she could be pretty is if you projected her shadow onto the wall. Then she'd look like a woman. Chipped nails, no makeup, a tangled, twisted mess for hair, a loose shirt flecked with cornmeal. Is that what John saw in her? The potty-mouth charm? I couldn't picture them together. Maybe she was different now. Maybe killing someone changes you. I wondered how it would change me as I got behind her cart and pushed. What if you don't have the right protein? Make something up. The diners aren't stupid. Nobody wants moule frites without muscles. We wandered the aisles, and Erin grabbed what she deemed to be the essentials of Mexican cooking. In the background were rapid, authoritative stabs of Spanish fired back and forth between happy ladies that were pressing tortillas. At the counter, the matron helping us pulled her upper lip at me when I asked to taste some of the dried chilies, like I was the first to ever do so. Poblano, Serrano, Habanero, garden-picked and sun-dried, we got them all for pennies per handful. Erin said she had cilantrophobia, that it tasted like soap to her, and if we cook with it, I'd have to do the tasting. Then she told me about capsaicin and how it made food hot. She knew the hows of cooking and the whys. I compared miniature cans of pickled jalapenos while I listened, trailing behind her. I watched her gait, listened to the rhythm of her voice. It's hard to take something apart if you don't know how it works, the game within a game. "Where to next, chef?" I said, hands racked with plastic grocery bags. "When I think Texas, I think beef," she said. When I thought Texas, I thought chainsaw, but beef made sense too. I couldn't get a handle on Erin. She was a tomboy one minute and a food scientist the next. She moved through space like the outer world wasn't observing her, neither elegant nor crude. It showed an ambivalence that I envied. She shuttled me around town and offered a rundown on local barbecue spots and the best late-night sushi. Part of what made the left coast so good was that it didn't have the sacred food traditions that weren't allowed to evolve. Barbecue was but one example. The sticky sweet of Kansas City coexists with thin Carolina vinegar, smoked Texas brisket, black Korean short rib. They were all here and no one called anyone inauthentic. Good was good, the way it should be. "The chef coming tonight, Jamie, is such an asshole," she said. "You mentioned you didn't like him, or is it a her?" "No, what I said was I fucking hated him." The car bumped up on the front lip of her driveway. Erin lived on a freshly built row of houses that looked like they were transplanted from an affluent Midwestern suburb, shoved real close together, then dipped in a saturated Californian hue. The second-floor windows were close enough to pass eggs between neighbors, a nice idea for a modern Rockwellian painting. The designs varied, but each had fat white pillars in front that stood in contrast to their surf guitar colors: aqua blue, seafoam green, candy apple red. Erin's was a deep purple, a bruised face with 4 long white pillars for teeth. "How do you know him?" I walked the groceries in from the garage, and Erin put them away. This was the most normal thing I'd done in a year, the lugging, the listening. I knew I was part of something horrible, but it felt good to be part of something at all, to have a purpose. "Jamie and I have a mutual friend, this hyper-Japanese girl he used to date. She took me to his restaurant, Clunk. Red Apple, up near Napa on the Kingsbury farm, and I hated it. I told her this throughout the meal, and she promised, knock, not to repeat what I said. But she did the moment their relationship turned. One of the courses was just butter. He thought he could serve a spoon with 3 different butters because the cows were outside. That's not cooking," she said and smashed another can on the counter. "Thack." Her voice was up to a rant. "I hate farm-to-table. All food comes from farms. It's goddamn nonsense." Blood was trickling out of the package of brisket in her hands. "You don't think the intention is good?" "What intention? Every chef I've ever met tries to find the best ingredients they can. That course was the equivalent of a painter putting a can of the finest red paint in the world on the wall and telling you to admire it for what it is." She was almost out of breath. "You've got to paint." "Easy, you maniac. Calm down," I said. She tilted her forehead at me. "An ingredient isn't better just because you plucked it off a tree." I had some thoughts on the matter, but Erin was so worked up she answered her own questions before I could get out a sound. Even when I wanted to talk, I couldn't. "Horse shit," she continued. "I want to taste something new or something ancient or something that I'll never want to taste again, but for God's sakes, don't give me a piece and call it complete." All of the cabinets were open, and she collected the plastic bags from the counter and pulsed them like a stress ball. "If you hate this guy so much, then why invite him over?" I moved the milk and other perishables to the refrigerator while Erin yammered. Inside was sparse but clean. She didn't spend a lot of time here. The cool air rushed over my arms. "I think he wants to embarrass me. He badmouths Essen even though he's never been there. I confronted him and a mutual friend suggested we settle our differences with food, and that's how we got here. The bet is that the loser has to post signs on their bathroom billboards saying the winner's restaurant is better. Joke's on him, though. We don't monetize our customers' bowel movements. He'd know that if he'd ever been to Essen," she said. "If this is such a big deal, then I'm not the guy you want helping. You should have gotten one of your more experienced cooks." "My cooks take enough shit from me. If they come here, it's to eat." "Miguel mentioned your kitchen demeanor, too. It's nice to know you're self-aware." "My sister's usually my second pair of hands, but she isn't allowed to use the big knives, if you know what I mean." My own idiocy slapped me in the face. I'd forgotten my knives and knew nothing about a sister. Chapter 8. Erin settled the group by shushing and flapping her arms. She was on her third Moscow mule and her skin was beginning to look sunburnt. The room fell silent save for the rustle and ting of copper mugs sipped and set back on the table. I sat with the other guests, looking up at our host. She sliced limes and addressed the room. I want to thank everyone for coming. Each time we do this, it's in good fun, but tonight is special because the stakes are especially high. Erin downplayed the seriousness of the underlying tiff with Jamie, so when she got to the part about the bathroom signs, the room let out a sarcastic gasp. A silver cup of golf pencils sat in the middle of the group along with a stack of oddly cut paper rectangles. The theme tonight is Tex-Mex, she said. Write your entrees down and get them in the bag. Erin pulled a velvet whiskey sack from her back pocket and tossed it onto the table. More than a dozen people were stuffed into a slim, formal dining room, the treadmill of the modern home, often owned but seldom used. The furniture was sparse, a sign that her family didn't care about her. Every good person has an ugly curio cabinet from a decrepit aunt or an oversized coffee table that Grandpa made, literal burdens of being too close with your family. Gifts so heavy with guilt you can't move them, no matter how long the giver's been dead. The dining table looked like a battering ram. Thick rustic beams were bound together with faux tarnished bolts and metal plates. The wood was worn and beaten and thick beyond purpose. A slice of brilliant polished teak ran down the middle of the table as a trivet. Some of the guests were cooks, while others told me they were chefs. I had trouble grasping the distinction between the two. One guy introduced himself as cook, but I overheard someone call him chef, which was doubly confusing. Erin was too busy playing host to parade me around for introductions, and I did my best to keep to myself and observe the strange world I'd worked so hard to be a part of. Everyone grabbed papers and began to write. The woman across from me tapped a pensive pen on her chin like choosing an entree was an important answer on an exam. As far as I could tell, there were only two people who didn't work with food professionally. The first was Erin's sister, Emily. Emily was smooth and polished, everything that Erin wasn't. Her stringy teal necklace matched her nails, which matched her shoes. Soup was her favorite food, and she wanted to know what my favorite German soup was. I told her French onion. She laughed and our feet slid together. Emily's friend Mike wrote with his paper up on the wall behind me. He was soft-spoken and sarcastic. His body loomed large, thicker and more imposing than any modern man needed to be. He kept saying things I knew were funny, but I didn't laugh out of spite. Emily lived there with her sister. This meant that Erin was so important that she left behind whatever life she'd started in Virginia and followed her to the other side of the country. They looked the same age, but I could tell Erin was older by the way she reminded Emily that the knife she was using to cut strawberries couldn't go in the dishwasher when we'd first arrived. Emily sat at the kitchen island while we put away groceries, inspecting each sliced piece of fruit. She ate one half and put the other in a bowl. She was too pretty to question. Mike took Emily's seat the moment she fluttered off to chat and smile at someone else. He introduced himself with the handshake of a father on prom night. My hand in his hand, he said, "I know you." I loosened my grip. His held firm. "How's that?" "You're the guy who regrets getting roped into this circus." He pushed my golden cup to the side and replaced it with a Budweiser from his back pocket. "Almost. I'm the guy who regrets being one of the performers." "Oh, shit. Which team you on?" "Home. I'm the new cook at Essen." "That's a shame. I hate foodies." He reached to take back the beer. "I'm not a foodie," I said, snatching it back. "You cook for a living even though the pay sucks, and on your night off you're cooking for your boss, for free. Seems like foodie shit to me." He and Emily were the only interesting people at the table, because they weren't talking about food, they were making fun of it. Emily jammed herself between us, and in the shuffle to make room, a wine bottle was knocked out of the rack behind us. Emily snapped her head towards the noise, and a shining twirl of blonde hair flung out from behind her ear. A cold shower shock clung to the front of my body. The hair on my arm stood up. I turned my attention to the paper, and then wrote General Tso's chicken to make myself feel better. I tossed it in the bag with the rest. Chef Jamie stood at the other end of the table with a haircut so stupid I wanted to punch it. The tight comb-over was slicked to the right with a sharp shaved part. The hair underneath was buzzed down to the scalp. He wore black skinny jeans below his puffed gut, below his double chin. His fat wasn't made out of grease and candy bars. It was made out of spicy Australian Syrah and elderberry torts. Jamie hid his lumpy neck with a blanket scarf. In the crinkled paper silence of passing around the purple bag, I imagined a loose thread on the scarf catching fire while we cooked, the flames rushing up the synthetic fabric and exploding majestic in whatever beard butter he used to tamp down the tangle he'd grown to give shape to the nebulous mass he called a face. "Tonight," Erin said, her hand puffed and stirred in the sack with a dramatic pause, "we will be cooking chili." Gilded chili. Interesting. Jamie had a puzzled expression on his face, like he didn't know what chili was. "Good luck, chef," I said, and pulled my legs from under the stout table one at a time. I weaved through the crowd, pontificating how chili could be improved. "I hope for something less Kansas family reunion," Jamie said. He gave a hiss to the words that I'd often heard from people on the crooked fringes of our country, the ones that thought California and New York were the only states with indoor plumbing. The middle has the exact same crap as everywhere else. It costs less, but you have to drive a little farther to get to a museum. I slid my way through the crowded room and joined the other cooks in the kitchen. Erin directed traffic in a black and white polka-dotted apron so cute she merely looked wretched. Jamie and his assistant took notes as she assigned prep and cook space to each team. Erin instructed us to use the countertops as cutting boards because they were non-porous, a statement that made me want to vomit. There was a large rectangular island and a second sink, plenty of room for the four of us to cook while guests passed through to get chilled beer or wine from the garage. We had 90 minutes to cook an appetizer and chili for more than a dozen people. It would have been less personal to search her vagina for a lost coin than to ask Erin for a knife. Knives are extensions of who you are in the kitchen. A cook spends so much will and energy cleaning and caring for their knives that they often have nothing left to give their own body. Erin motioned me to a knife block hidden behind the blender. The gnarled meat shears had the female end of a zip tie stuck between the blades. Thankfully, the plastic was white and not blue. I held up a crooked chef's knife with a broken tip. Erin laughed. "Those are for Emily. Use mine." Fear snuck up my leg and rung up my body like a spiral staircase ascending to hell. I looked at the handles and picked the one that was the least worn. The chili I'd eaten growing up was crock-pot comfort food served to groups. I knew it came from Texas and wasn't supposed to have beans, but my mom didn't know that, and neither did anyone else until the internet was invented. Home-style chili is a homogeneous mush where the kidney beans taste the same as the tomato chunks. Chili is simple and good. I don't know where the delusion came from that for something to be good it had to be authentic. Slavery was authentic Americana, but I sure as hell wouldn't call that good. I think the Constitution might be easier to amend than a recipe. "Set the oven to 350, Erin said with the authority of someone who knew what they were going to put in it. 350 degrees is the bullshit temperature, the one you use for cut-off recipes and bad memories. I was thankful we got the bottom oven, so I didn't have to witness Jamie's bent-over ass crack, plumped up like a push-up bra in his too-tight jeans. I kept staring at his bottom half. There were places in his calves and thighs that the jeans seemed loose, and I couldn't reconcile how so thin a bottom could hold up such a thick top. Erin propped herself up next to the sink, asking me what I knew about chili. A spare pen was clipped up the sleeve of her t-shirt, and she looked sincere about wanting my thoughts. I had a hot flash of rage, feet held to the fire and blood boiling upwards. The shears were within reach. The polka-dotted primeval wrote my ideas in a large, bubbly script that only made me more upset. I couldn't stand how unburdened she looked. Her actions the function of the now and uncolored by the tumultuous road she'd taken to right there, right then. She relaxed her head into her palm and asked me how I'd refined chili. The same way you refined people, I guessed, even knife work and proper presentation. Cut the meat right and it's tender. Slice the vegetables evenly to avoid an unpleasant raw crunch. Plating was like makeup. You know it's an illusion, but pretty is always better than honest. I told her to grill ribeye, rest it, fan it over the top. Ribeye's too easy, think bigger, she said. This shifted me into the competitive spirit of the game, and my dark thoughts faded out. In all likelihood, I'd be going to jail forever, and I wasn't about to spend the rest of my life reliving a loss to this stupid Jamie character. I thought Erin was doing that chef thing where bigger meant replacing a common ingredient with something more expensive to call it better. Wagyu isn't for burgers, tenderloin doesn't go in chili, I said. For someone from the farm, you don't know much about meat. She was from a town that celebrated its history as the Confederate capital in the Civil War, and I was the one who was uncultured. We're going to do lamb shank and dry sausage. If you think ribeye has more flavor than shank, then you probably shouldn't be cooking, she said. My eyes widened. It was playful and mean and ambitious. I hunched over the spiral flipbook with Erin and watched her hand turn the paper into a plan. She was always writing in these little books. If you told her about something interesting you ate, or threw out a word she'd never heard, she'd whip out one of these little books from her ass pocket and write it down. I never saw her read one, but she constantly wrote in them. We only have an hour to cook, I said. That means move your ass. No, I mean, how do you cook 6 giant lamb shanks in an hour? A pressure cooker, you dumb shit. The name-calling made me more embarrassed than angry. Every time she pointed out some obvious flaw in my knowledge, I wondered when she'd figure me out, when she'd lure me in and give me my own maroon puddle to writhe and gasp in while she waited to call the police. Please don't tell me you've never used one, she said. It'll melt the shanks and tomato together in no time. I'm afraid of them. There was an accident when I was a kid. She frowned, but didn't apologize. Take that, you insensitive twat. Did you get hurt? I don't like talking about it. Jamie and his Sue grabbed and chopped while Erin and I stood in the corner, elbow to elbow, and decided what and how to cook. She knew so much, but still asked for my thoughts, treated me like an equal when I was so clearly inferior. Get this, chop that. No, over there. Erin blistered fresh chilies on the stove and steamed off their skin in a plastic sandwich bag. I nestled brown shanks and volcanic soil-grown tomatoes into the cooker. She poured in a mysterious white powder, so the sauce emulsifies with the fat and gets dark, like blood. We agreed on all the details, and our first dance began. Our hands and feet synced, and we waltzed. 1, 2, 3, chop. 2, 3, taste. We squeezed limes and shook salt into beers, and we sipped, and we laughed. 2, 3. Erin crumpled some brown chorizo. I zested lime skin into the crema. Spin. I swiped cilantro fingers under her nose to see if she would gag, but she laughed, and laughed, and we laughed, and she sneezed, and we danced. The beat was the blade on the cutting board, the audience the medley of grease pops and aromatic winds that swirled from one side of the kitchen to the next. The violin solo of steam, eking out from under pressure, whistled our end was nigh. The cello was the bubbling on the stove, the bass hummed by the convection in the oven. 2, 3. The hypnotic tuts of the kitchen tempered my restless heart. Sweating, we stood over our creation, but I wasn't relieved. I wasn't happy. The finish line of the feast was the moment when I snapped back into my body and who I was and what I was doing, and it wasn't through a lens of disgust or hate that I saw Erin while she tugged at the back knot of her apron and shook down burnt paprika hair. It was pity. Not pity for what she'd done, but pity for what I had to do to her. Chapter 9. Jamie's assistant and I conga lined the appetizers out to the group on clear plastic saucers while the chefs stood at the head of the table and over-explained their dishes. During the passing of the plates, I watched a smarmy man in a sweater vest sniff and rotate his plate quarter turns, all the way around. I hate foodies, which I define as anyone who can eat something, then complain, even though they were perfectly happy with the way it tasted. The woman seated to his left had a different nasal ritual. She sniffed the plate front to back with rapid, pulsating nostrils. I hoped a bit of her snot would fly out onto the plate. I'd have taken great joy in seeing her try to discreetly wipe it off, or try and eat around it. Chef Jamie served a series of perfectly round, single-bite tostadas. Each piece had a different colored sauce. Together, they looked like a marketing tool Mexico City might use for an Olympic bid. Jamie brought his own bag of masa and stamped out each tortilla by hand, even though there was a stack on the counter, made that morning by the hibiscus ladies of the Mexican market. Our poblano peppers were stuffed with a chorizo and rice mixture and sprinkled with cojita cheese. The lime and honey gas streak spooned over the top added a nice sheen. Erin seeded and stemmed all the peppers after they were roasted and then smeared them out onto sheets with a skillful swipe of her blade. Rolled up in sauce, they looked nice and ate well. I had trouble with the concept of how something ate. Erin rejected a lot of my suggestions on account of clunk or mess. She reminded me all the time that food tasted good everywhere, but in a real restaurant, the whole menu goes from your fork to your mouth, not into your lap. With that in mind, it was a struggle to serve our chili. In every bowl of chili, there's one magical bite, a loving spoonful where the slow burn hits the right pitch, and you pile in the perfect ratio of sauce and meat, and as the sweat stacks on your brow, the sour cream washes back the hot current the whole way to your stomach. Then you get to chase that moment all week. Erin and I bickered over the test bowl, towels clamshelled around our waists like the dramatic moment right before the commercial break. She wanted less liquid in the bowls because it looked messy. The molten runoff tasted too good to leave out, I argued. It was acidic and fatty and spicy and amazing. We compromised by dressing the twisted nest of braised lamb with a tiny scoop from the bottom of the pot. Our tangle of meat was peppered with green and red onion that Erin tempered in a mixture of lime juice, tequila, and sugar. I piped an even swirl of crema on top from a sandwich bag clipped in the corner, a taco night trick stolen from my mom. Chef Jamie's chili wasn't served in a bowl but on a plate, and fuck him and everyone like him for that. His plate had slices of brisket atop black bean pancakes and deep-fried peppers. It was the aching Hieronymus Bosch version of food. The empty spots on the plate were filled with artful flings of sauce and smears of jellied whatever. Edible overcompensation. There were 24 ingredients on his plate, and not one of them tomato, or restraint. The guests began eating, sniffing, wafting, eyeballing, and I grabbed a handful of Mexican beers from the garage to share with my new friend Mike. Mexican beer was really German beer made with shitty ingredients, I told him. When I returned to the table, a chef seated down the bench explained the mechanism by which deconstruction changes the form of a dish, but not the basic essence, or some such nonsense. Someone else interjected, questioning whether Jamie's food was a true deconstruction or a renovation on the original notion of chili. When I was done with Erin, I thought I might go after him next. Erin sat down and dug into her food without looking at anyone. While she had her hand cupped under her spoon, Emily offered a crisp 20 to the plate-sniffing man if he would do a line of chili. Then she stood up and said, "I'll get a straw." That's when the first bite was almost to Erin's lips, and a huge guffaw sent a chunk of tomato rolling down the middle of the table, leaving a thick red swipe in its wake. Face down on the living room couch, I peered over Mike's shoulder at his phone. My starboard and port flanks throbbed from laughing. Mike and I got bad dogged into the living room for misbehaving after dinner, and he sat below me on the floor, legs crossed, flipping through the pictures he'd taken. After the guests were served, the cooks retired to the kitchen to clean up. Erin opened another bottle of wine, and the four of us huddled around the island to pick at and compliment each other's work. Jamie picked up the cork and gave it a long, hard sniff. The dishes scrubbed, boxes of pastry were passed around. Jamie lightened up. It's hard to be a jerk with an eclair in your mouth. Erin shuffled the scorecards together and tabulated the results, while the overfed diners patted their bellies and leaned back in sweet discomfort. One after the other, the cards said that Erin's plate worked best. Only one person preferred Jamie's artsy smears and glops to the unsophisticated lamb and tomato knot we'd made together. Each tabulation scaled up the contrast of Jamie's face. By the time the pile was finished, I could see every stray hair in his beard. "This is absolute bullshit," Jamie began. "I'm glad you have the approval of your gutter palate friends. I should have left when I saw instant ramen cups in the pantry." Emily stuck her tongue out at him and wagged her head. Everyone laughed a bit, and I hoped the mood would settle, but he snapped his gaze back to Emily. "What makes you qualified to judge my food?" Emily took a few minutes to put together the right words. "You ask people to do that every day at your restaurant, don't you? We don't have to take a test to make a reservation. People judge you by coming back or not. And that's a lot harder than here, because when you go to a restaurant, you aren't being compared to one chef, but everywhere that person's ever eaten." Emily folded her hands on the table, knowing she'd given a thoughtful and measured response. After an uncomfortable silence, she said, "Those noodle cups are mine. It's cheap and easy, and I like them, you goofy-footed prick." A small laugh buckled out of the back of my throat, and Erin shot me a look so intense I felt my penis retreat into my body. I rubbed the scars on my right ear. The sisters might have been very different outside, but inside they were full of hydrogen, and all they needed was a hot enough spark to ignite. Jamie was warming them up. "Plebeian, I should have guessed," Jamie said. Mike shot up from his chair, fighting with a napkin stuck to his cheek. "Watch it, motherfucker." He pointed the cannolo in his hand, and a bit of cream flew out and splashed into a glass of wine. Motherfucker is a magical expression when it's said with such authority. It sounded thin and meaningless when I said it. Mike's soft voice morphed into a pointed double bass that struck like a hand on the cheek. The whip crack of the third and fourth syllables pushed Jamie back a step. Mike bugged his eyes, then wiped the cream on his lips with the back of his arm like a 5-year-old with the sniffles. His shoulder blades pulled together and pinched the hood of his sweatshirt, coiling to strike. Emily dismissed him to the living room in a maternal way that did little to hide her admiration that he stood up for her. "Jamie, you might be right," I said. "I liked your food a lot, and this was fun, but I'll finish cleaning up so you can get out of here." I didn't care what happened. I wanted a gold star from Erin. She cocked her head and lowered her eyes at me. She wasn't pleased with my diplomacy. "I'd rather eat shit than cook for you bunch of savages," Jamie said. He walked into the kitchen to grab his things while Erin spouted apologies to the stunned room. Before he left through the garage, he called back to Erin. "Only a grade-A cunt would let their sister be an impartial judge." The more he piled it on, the more I was aware of what she could do. If he didn't stop heckling her, I knew she was going to break. While we watched Jamie walk through the kitchen, the bottoms of our glasses began vibrating, and the thunder rolled as Mike flew across the dining room with his hand stretched out. I thought he was holding a pastry when he bounded into the garage, arm hailed outwards, and leapt onto Jamie's back. We saw them crash onto the front grass through the slats of the window. All of us moved to the porch to leer. Mike pumped his heavy arms into Jamie's face. From behind, all I could see was Mike's elbow move in and out like he was giving Jamie a well-deserved beating. Jamie groped and spat, but sounded more enraged than hurt. Erin chirped half-hearted calls to stop as she ran towards Mike. She grabbed him by both shoulders and tried to tip him backwards, but his base was too wide, and she was the one who ended up on the ground. Mike had Jamie's shoulders pinned to the ground with his knees, and he was layering Jamie's face with a fistful of cat shit. He must have found the cat box during Jamie's outburst and scooped up as much as he could. Mike was smearing it around while he heckled. "You said you'd rather eat shit." Jamie fluttered, turning his face from side to side. Mike mashed away, and every time Jamie tried to yell, some of it went into his mouth. Erin picked a bit of grass off her face and took a few steps back, and then shot forward to bull rush Mike. She speared him in the ribs, and again was bounced into the grass. Mike continued holding Jamie's arms down with his shins as he snapped pictures with his phone. "Stop squirming." Mike eventually let him up, but continued to pound the capture button and followed him all the way to his car, dragging Erin along like a highlight reel running back if the tacklers were allowed to slap and swear. "Damn, my phone smells terrible," Mike said and offered it out for me to have a whiff. The photos were grainy and dark, my nose over Mike's shoulder as he thumbed through them. We took turns captioning each photo that rolled into view. "Now that's a shit-eating grin," and we laughed. "Excuse me, miss, do I have something on my face?" And we laughed. "I'm not sure what's worse, all this shit or the black guy on top of me," and we laughed. Back and forth we went until our chests were so tired we couldn't speak. It felt so good to laugh again, to revel in instant karma. Soon the house was dark and quiet, the girls asleep after calling us names and begging us to shut up for what felt like hours. The sound of Mike's breath came from the love seat across from me, his legs folded over the arm like a spare blanket. Before Erin marched upstairs and went to bed, she apologized for not being sober enough to drive me home, and then came to her senses and told me I deserved the sore back the crappy couch was sure to give me. I focused on the thrum of his breath, and when it became constant, I marched into the kitchen, searching for one last drink. The double doors of the refrigerator cast a soap scum backlight which mixed with the muted halogen bulbs from under the cabinet and made my feet glow radioactive blue against the flecked tile. The metal pot with the chili opened, and before I knew what I was doing, I had a spoon in one hand and a wine glass full of the spicy liquid in the other. I left the doors open and shuffled otherworldly through the transom and onto the dining room carpet, the glass in front of me falling. It bounced end over end. 1, 2, 3. Bits of rust and red splattered, then puddled where the glass settled on its side. The fallen mess of dots glared back at me from everywhere, like sperm under a black light. I sat beside the pool, combed it back and forth in my fingers. I imagined John lying there on the carpet, consciousness closing like a moving picture vignette, arms flapping, swaddled in a warm blanket of freshly beaten blood that was to be the vessel to carry him home. It was the cold trickle of water down his chest, right before his heart gave out. I fanned the thick red sludge back and forth, my pinky the rudder in an ocean of imaginary gore. I slapped and gestured until it was an imperfect bloody angel in the doorway, one with too long a skirt and mismatched wings. What would Erin see when she scrubbed it clean? A bloody visage or a blessed miracle? I wonder if she thought about the men who had cleaned up her mess. Not only the men who brought soap for John's carpet, all manner of men, with shovels for digging and pens for rationalizing, and even someone with string to tie around John's teeth to keep his mouth shut while we stood over him with his mom, looking for holes and saying our second-to-last goodbye. I closed my eyes and I saw his holes again, 1 in the head, 1 in the hand, and 4 in the chest. A 6 holes but 5 shots riddle I'd probably seen in a police procedural. This was the number 1 with a bullet, a warning shot over her bow. I closed my eyes and saw his holes again, 1 in the head, 1 in the hand, and 4 in the chest. A 6 holes but 5 shots riddle I'd probably seen in a police procedural. This was the number 1 with a bullet, a warning shot over her bow. The bloody angel on the carpet soothed the devil in my heart. I stood over it with heaving breaths but steady hands. At the sink, I scrubbed the glass with bits of tomato squished between my toes. I fell asleep with my nose buried in the back crack of the couch and my hands, prayer clasped, stuffed between my thighs. Grief Journal, Day 377. Charlie and I shared the same corner booth for lunch the first day of Erin's trial and all 10 days thereafter. It was a Greek family restaurant where most of the food wasn't Greek. Places like this always have textbook menus and servers with bad attitudes. It takes forever to dig through all the options and figure out which one is scratch-made by the family matriarch with a hairy mole on her chin. Or I could get popcorn shrimp. You have to be careful what you order at these places. Wipe down your utensils. There's usually duct tape on the seats and mold in the pie case, but I'll still eat there if the lemon rice soup is good, especially if it comes with fresh bread instead of sleeved crackers. I filter each spoonful through my teeth, sifting for cartilage so I know the stock was made with whole chickens. They wouldn't strain it properly, so the nasty bits let you know it's made right. This case seems straightforward. You're smart. What are our odds? Charlie said. He sped through the menu, flipping page after tacky page. Sweat fell down his head and made a darkened dimple on each side of his collar. He'd come from the gym, and the top side of his arm was a webbed array of veins that shuttled fresh blood around to repair whatever damage he'd done. We have good odds, but I don't think it would pass the airplane test, I said. There was a browned picture of tzatziki in the left margin. I hoped it was bad lighting and not what they were serving with the French fries. What do you mean? Charlie said. How low would the chance to crash have to be for you to board a plane? 1 in 100? 1,000? Million? It isn't 100%, that's all I'm saying. Charlie gave me a blank stare that eased into a gaping maw. His lips flapped the moment a thought came into medium focus. Even though she said she killed him, she could get set free? Even though she said she killed him, she could get set free? Charlie sucked soda through a straw, hands in his lap, with the lowered eyes of a middle schooler trying to hide a fart. Murder isn't defined as killing someone. People kill other people all the time, I said. Murder is killing someone with no legal justification. So this psycho bitch is trying to say what she did was legal because it was self-defense. But that can't hold up. You saw how crazy she acted in the interrogation video. She's fucking bananas. Charlie asked the waitress if he could have a banana, and I gave him a dirty look. What? I need carbs, he said. The video he was referring to was taken the night of the murder. The cops left Erin alone after 2 hours of questioning, and she was seen on camera singing to herself, high and sweet as an angel, in a white wool sweater flecked with blood, and black leggings that probably were too. She sang church hymns and danced herself slowly around the room, repeating, Hallelujah. Charlie and I began the trial with the hope it would be quick and painful for everyone, but mostly for Erin. The next thing I knew, I was showing Charlie clips of Erin's lawyer painting John as a psychopath, how he belittled her, how he demeaned her and looked down upon her middle-class roots, how he threatened her, his prescription drug abuse, how he manipulated her, his violent sexual tendencies. He loved to suck her toes, he said, in an angry way. I snorted at this because it was irrelevant and silly. How John loved mixed martial arts and knew how to execute a rear-naked choke which didn't leave a mark. It sounded sexual, but wasn't, Charlie told me. I set up an old PC to record a live stream of the trial and sent clips out nightly to our friends. Erin didn't take the stand until day 9, so I spent a lot more time studying her back than her front. Each day, Charlie and I came together to prod our food, wishful think, and distract ourselves by hypothesizing every iteration of John propositioning a girl to suck her feet, with his gentle demeanor asking if it would be all right if he sucked on her toes, and then he would offer fair warning it wasn't going to be pleasant. Pulling on her toes with his mouth like he was trying to get the last drops of a milkshake out of the bottom of a foam cup, twisting the toe around like a straw, searching for one last taste. We decided the Duke didn't suck toes. It was beneath him, but he might let you suck his. You would need to do so as a lady, and if you dribbled on his feet, the Duke would not be happy. I always thought if John had a weird sex thing, it would involve his hair, I said. After a week of meeting in the same place, the waitress nodded at us from a distance to confirm yes, we wanted the same thing as yesterday. John made me sit and listen to him have phone sex once, Charlie said. He wanted me to sit on the bed with him, but I sat in the computer chair. He told her to pull his hair like 5 times. That fetish made sense. John kept a barber mirror and shears in his car. When he went out of town to visit friends, he would take his hair kit. If there was a lull, he would slip into the nearest bath and give himself a trim. You might find a bit of his head under the sink or behind the toilet and wonder what the fuck happened to the cat, or ask your roommate if she had any strange men over who had shaved. If it comes back not guilty, what do we do? Charlie asked this question every day. He'd throw it out there so I'd coddle him with certainties of her guilt. As the trial beat on, Charlie watched the warring sides disparage each other, and he got more forceful, and I needed clarification. What do you mean by do? I asked. You know exactly what I mean. Charlie crinkled his forehead, which doubled his age. If the court does what it's supposed to, then evil's punished, but she can't get free. She gets the cage or the axe, and I'll need your help. It was his heart saying these things and not his brain. I didn't believe he meant it. Even when his eyes were half full of tears, and I was counting the seconds before they overflowed like waiting for a red light to turn green. 1, 2, 3, 4. Cry. He was too emotional to kill anyone, even if he meant to. He'd get arrested on the way, shooting wildly into the sun and screaming apologies to the wind for what he was about to do. Compressed and volatile, Charlie was capable of terribleness in immediate bursts. Sprinters don't run marathons. Have faith in the system, Chuck, I said, but didn't believe it. We know she's guilty. It'll be okay, I soothed him. Now and forever, everything's going to be fine. I was full of platitudes. Charlie thought I was smart because I could tell people with broken electronics to unplug it and plug it back in, only I said power cycle. The knowledge I did have was used to build things that built things that nobody needed. People used to build great libraries to symbolize man's quest for knowledge. Now we have the internet, which is both more powerful and wonderful. The men who used to get their information from the library were considered scholars, but the men who get their information from the internet are considered idiots, or worse, thieves. I know, Alex, Charlie said. I'll give up my life for John. The two of you are the best friends I've ever had. 2 of us, Charlie. There's only 2 of us now. The rest of the trial did little to persuade us that Erin wasn't guilty. We watched as she took the stand and raised her right hand, promising to tell the truth. Then she adjusted the microphone with her left, cleared her throat, and lied. Erin's lawyers tore John's life apart. They twisted his mild anxiety into paranoia. They flipped his intellect into evil calculation. Everything he was became everything he wasn't. the calculated hand of a magician in a cheap suit. Look over here, jury, at the sloppy knot of my tie, while the facts are twisted into the sloppy knot. The jury deliberated a few hours at most. The media swarmed. Huddled masses with different station IDs buzzed outside the courthouse, led by the head of a microphone boom like a carrot on a stick. Chef puts down knife and fights abuse with real steel, the headline maybe read. I avoided the tabloids. John's mom addressed the media after the verdict came in. His dad was slumped next to her. In his eyes, I saw he wasn't mourning the loss of his son, but also his grandkids and their kids. His mind so tired from churning the modal coulds and shoulds that it had no energy left for posture. The truth didn't matter. From the outset, I had a feeling it would go this way, that she would be set free. I knew it the first time I saw her. When she walked in the courtroom through a side door for a bail hearing a few days after the funeral, dressed in thick black and white prison stripes. Her jumpsuit wasn't faded and worn like a turn-of-the-century prison break. Color-safe bleach kept each stripe in sharp contrast like the walls of an Art Deco motel. Cuffed, she shuffled out with a prison ponytail, and even though I knew she was a killer, I thought, she doesn't look like a murderer. She had kind eyes. She angled her head and tossed smiles to the people around the room as she sat there with her lawyer, who wore bitchy, pointed shoes. Erin's cheeks were puffed and reddened from swiping away tears. When the verdict came back and John's parents tipped into another, their heads touched to form a peak. Lily and her brothers collapsed in upon themselves like an old casino after the plunger was pushed by two sets of greased hands. The courtroom gasped. I took a breath so deep my back cracked 3 times, bottom to top. When I heard the verdict, I wasn't ready to hurt her. Both my hands still clutched the ledge of reason. I remember that first breath, the way it bent my back and pushed my sails. I knew Charlie wouldn't kill her, but I wasn't convinced I had to either. I needed one last thing to stop my fingers, to make me let go and fall free, where I'd reach a terminal velocity, and as I passed the sonic boom, I'd know I needed to end her life. Chapter 10, Day 960. It took 3 shifts at Essen to understand the mixtape beat of restaurant life. Morning prep was the up-tempo kick drum of modern pop, repetitive and predictable, the best part of the day. Midday swerved and screamed like a movie soundtrack. Moments of silence followed by violent shrieks of hurried lunchgoers. Dinner wasn't cooking. It's reheating at 220 beats per minute. Thrash metal. Peeling 2 quarts of garlic was the most fun I'd ever had, though it made it hard to pet the dog when I got home. Erin scrawled a crooked prep list across the whiteboard each morning in a jagged cursive. All of her L's were different heights, which was suffocating to look at. I duck/slashed sharp check marks next to each finished task, and then looked around to make sure nobody saw me fixing 1 letter at a time. A little treat I gave myself for doing good work. Today, Erin was serving rouladen. One of my prep duties was to slice flank steak, cover it in plastic wrap, and pound it razor thin. The pages of meat are used like tortillas to wrap up a mixture of pickles and mustard and pork. It sounds disgusting, it looks disgusting, but it's really good. My family had their own version, rolled with far less precision than was expected of me. The mustard-smeared beef made me think of Grandma's stained oxygen tube and the inappropriate way she told me the color of every person when telling a story. Grandma wasn't all that nice, and I hated the way she shoved food in my face while complaining I was too skinny. A wrinkled exterior with a sour pickle core. Grandma was a rouladen. The cook next to me, Tommy, had fat black gauges in his ears and was burdened by existence. His station was a mess and his work uneven, but he mowed through tasks at twice my speed. "That'll go faster," Tommy said, "if you beat it down with the bottom of a cast-iron pan." I ignored him and kept pounding on the meat. Tommy's knees and elbows were 2 inches too far from his body. He looked like a Plastic Man doll after a few weeks with a manic toddler. I tamped the steak down 3 times and rolled it out with a pin. 3 times and rolled. The meat buckled and waved down the table, nodding if I hit a tuft of fat. "But it won't be even," I said. The plastic wrap protecting me from splatter bunched up, and I fought to untangle the mess. I kneaded at it, making it worse. "Alex, what the fuck are you doing?" Erin yelled from the stovetop, a pan in each hand. The microwave cawed at me with finished bacon inside. "Preventing raw meat from flying around the kitchen?" I pulled at the stuck film. She huffed over and yanked the wrap out of my hands. I think he's on the spectrum, Tommy said. Erin laughed and I seethed. Mise en place, everything in its place, right where it should be. My penchant for order wasn't getting over. Once the meat was rolled out, I filled the center with bacon and mustard and whatever else had been laid out, like making cinnamon rolls on Sunday morning. Each finished hotel pan went into the oven, and I circled back to fan out more meat. It felt good, predictable, satisfying. I liked preparation. Does anyone know what that European plum liquor is called? Looks like a genie bottle, Erin said over my shoulder. Those need sauce. Schlivovitz? I said. It's brandy. Yeah, that's the clear one? Erin scribbled in a little notebook. Right. Schlivovitz was a feature in the homes of post-war immigrants. I heard stories of it being used as a cough remedy, antiseptic, even a cleaning solution. Whenever we went into the city to see my grandparents, I'd have to drink some. When we arrived, Grandma told us to take off our shoes, and Grandpa followed with a sterling silver tray that had a plum bottle of brandy and a collection of mismatched shot glasses. Dad waited for Grandpa to turn around and then poured his into the rubber tree plant on his way to the kitchen. This plant needs it more than me, Dad once told me. It has to be around them all the time. Do you think they sell it around here? She asked, ticking her pen on the pad. I slid a finished pan onto the oven and set it on top of the stove. Yeah, get the fat round bottle, the Polish one. It's the least horrible. Done rolling, more pounding. Chicken this time. The most basic jobs were left to me, the low man in the kitchen. Chicken thigh for schnitzel. Erin served traditional mushroom gravy on top, but I preferred a simple slice of lemon. She crinkled her face to wall back obscenities when I told her this. Telling her how to cook was a button I could push any time I wanted to see her uncomfortable, and I did it every chance I got. That's how Emily likes it. Think about that, she said. Erin and I perceived food differently. She saw portobello with pan drippings. I saw fungus with meat runoff and flour paste. The lemon tasted better, and then the dish didn't look like it was covered with liquid shit. Peel, slap, chop. Boil, roast, glaze. The best part of the day. When morning prep was finished and my station clean, I went over to the bar to check in with Erin. She sat on a tufted bar stool, angling the corners of freshly printed menus into the holders stacked up on the bar. Chef? I said and slid between the stools. Erin, you mean. She flipped a gray rag between us and dug at the dried food stuck on the corner of the holder with her chewed fingernail. I called her chef because that's what they did on TV. It dehumanized her and let me enjoy the job, even if it was pretentious and stupid. Stew, fry, sear. Lineup is ready for you to taste, I said. I need to run out and get a new phone charger. She didn't ask what happened. I'm sure she knew it was stupid and probably dangerous. Kitchens get childish in a hurry, like a middle school locker room with slightly less nudity. The front of the house is a prim facade that hides a lunatic engine in the back. Cooks need distractions to avoid thinking about the heat and steam breaking down their tendons, the beating every joint takes, lugging freezer crates of meat, the 10 tasks that need to be executed perfectly in the next 8 minutes with a fogged brain that's had too much booze and not enough sleep. Then a waitress comes begging for her food, which reminds you that she'll get twice the tip the more you sweat. That morning, the newly anointed sous chef, Tommy, made a slap bet with me. He claimed he could identify any dried herb blind, so I put him to the test. He shut his eyes, and I tossed a pinch of green into his mouth and scurried back to my charging phone. Wild-eyed, he sauntered over to me and screamed, "Marjoram!" and then slapped me as hard as he could. He grinned a mouthful of herb-splattered teeth while I rubbed my cheek. The phone flew out of my hand and ripped the charging cord in half. "Before you go," Erin paused. "This is awkward, but you know my sister?" Hard to forget someone I almost killed. Also gorgeous, also silly, and sweet. "Who?" Erin set her menu on top of my stack cockeyed, and I wanted to disassemble her like a fryer chicken. It's illegal to have sex with a live chicken, but you can do whatever you want to a bucket of fried bird from the grocery store. This world is a strange place. "Don't make this harder than it already is," she said. "Yes, blonde, nice teeth, chatty," I said. "I'm trying to ask if you'd like to come to dinner with us." "Are you trying to set me up with your sister?" I asked. You ate a serving spoon of horseradish the day you started here. I would never set you up with my sister. I cut her off. I was establishing dominance. Stuffing my mouth with the white devil and keeping it down for $5 was like throwing a fruit cup at a prison guard your first day in the penitentiary. Credibility had to be established. I knew I was going to make mistakes, so I figured I'd catch less crap if I was likable. Secondly, she said over me, I love my sister more than anything in the world and would never set her up with someone who worked here. I didn't want you to think it was just going to be the two of us. I worded it wrong. I'm sorry. That was disappointing. I hadn't so much as kissed a girl in a year. I couldn't even masturbate. The last evening I tried to make time for myself, I was working with hot peppers, and after a few tugs, my crotch burned for 8 hours. It was so traumatizing I rarely touched my penis to pee. I unzipped and pointed my hips to aim. Even if Emily didn't like me, at least I could take comfort in the fact that the thing she loved most was what I almost destroyed. A happy accident. So if it's not a date, why are you being weird? She swiveled her bar chair towards me, hands on her knees. Because we were invited by Mike, and it will be less awkward as a group. I wasn't trying to bait you with my sister. You're not her type. I put my elbow up on the counter and flopped my hand like a valley girl. What's this thing? It's a dinner and tasting at a winery in St. Helena. Mike is taking us to make up for the other night. You guys played so well the first time, we thought it would be fun. You should have just said that. He's the only person I've met out here that I don't hate. Some of the menus wouldn't sit perfect in all four corners of the holders. The edges of the tabs weren't parallel, and I vexed the thick stock back and forth, trying to make it right. I'd really appreciate it. I have some issues with men, and you'd be helping me find out if I want to go on a date, she said. Shit, sorry, oversharing. Now I get it. This is about you and Mike. Something like that, Erin said, and turned her legs back under the bar top. I really like him. I know you do, Alex. Probably more than me. I'll go, but if your sister is into me, you should tell me. You want to go out with Emily? Every guy wants to go out with your sister, even Count Tommy. I pulled my apron up to my face like a cape. Erin snorted like always. It was unattractive. It's not a date. Tomorrow night. You and I'll do all the morning prep, and we can leave after lunch. No jeans, no cat shit. Chapter 11, Day 961. The next afternoon, steam billowed from beneath my bathroom door, and I stood in front of it, counting to 10. My iron was broken, and I raced to find a way to get the fold lines out of a button-up shirt. Boiling water poured from the shower head with the hope the humidity would loosen up the shirt. The wrinkles clung together, afraid to get too close to the rusted bottom of the clawfoot tub they hung above. I kept my dress shirts in the middle drawer of my dresser. All of them were wrinkled, and all of them were gingham. Some of them still had the silver chest clips and tissue paper tucked under the collars. The paper rustled when I dug below for a second option to put in the dryer. I returned home from the restaurant to make myself presentable for what I hoped was a date, but wasn't. I was nervous. Emily was a shot at quelling the loneliness. I changed my shirt a few times, rotating the entire collection between my back and the steam room I'd created, unbuttoning, rolling up, picking at the sleeves. Nothing looked right. I returned them all to their store-bought position and moved on to the collars. The more I fidgeted, the more I thought about poor Emily's neck. Jitters turned to paralyzing self-examination once I was in front of Erin's house. The khakis, the loafers. Business casual attire looked superimposed on me, like tracksuits painted over the cast of The Last Judgment. Erin was on the porch, up on her toes, tipping a pink watering can into a hanging fern. I navigated around the gargantuan minibus in the driveway to get to her. She tugged at my collar. It's nice to see you when you aren't covered in sweat and grease. I'd gotten used to her touch. Kitchens are intimate places. You were always rubbing hips and reaching over one another. We could kill each other on accident. It's the perfect setup. I stumble around her venting a pressure cooker. She sidesteps with a cleaver in each hand. One slip and we both get what we deserve. Erin's salt-conned skin was always covered in black at work, so her greeting was followed by a Wizard of Oz moment where she burst forth in Technicolor for the first time. Draped in royal blue, the pleats of her dress grew and shrank with each step. Her hair was wavy and down, and it was the first time I saw her head without a writing instrument stuck through some part of it. Inside, Emily was on the couch, knees tipped together at odd angles. Her face shadowed, I saw the family resemblance. Silhouetted, their faces are roughly the same. Round, petite noses and plus-size eyes pulled a touch too far apart. In direct light, they look like different species of pretty insects. Emily is less pointed. She has no edges or juts. Her lips were saturated in a candy apple red that would make Erin look like a crime TV prostitute. Emily's hair was longer, the outer layers swept out in waves, and the inner rolled up in thick curls. Emily's beauty was gloss and shine, while Erin's was rivet and salt. All girls are beautiful, even the ones you want dead. "Good to see you, Alex," she said with fervor and shot up the stairs. "Be right back." Emily's dress was short, and the bottom of her ass played peekaboo with each upward hop. A moment later she bound back down and greeted me with a shoulder-top hug and a kiss that intentionally missed my cheek. She wasn't manic, it was the world that was slow. All of us needed to catch up to her. "You look nice," I said, but wanted to say beautiful, stunning, gorgeous, superlative. Those are magic words and should be conserved. There aren't many words you can say and a girl knows you mean it. And they don't want you to mean it all the time. We stood at the foot of the stairs, Emily a head taller than both of us with her feet planted on the first step. "Erin, this dress isn't too over the top for tonight, is it?" Emily accordioned out the bottom with a curtsy. "It's fine," Erin said like she graded a slew of other outfits. "Good, this is the only thing I have in dark red that I like," Emily said. "Who gives a shit about the color?" Erin replied. I stepped aside and ran my fingers along the grooves in the artichoke finial at the end of the banister. "Because I failed wine aiming 101, Emily said, deadpan. She stepped next to me. In heels, her head wasn't at the top of my shoulder, so I smiled down and to the right. My gaze lingered at her neckline, combed it over to see if I'd done any lasting damage. Erin whacked me in the gut when we walked away, thinking I was gawking at her sister's far superior chest. Rendered in shades of pink that blended to burgundy, I wished it was a date with Emily. But dates had questions: who you are, where you come from. Stupid questions we think of as the bland obligations of getting to know someone new, but they're really risk assessments, a banal anti-murder-death-killer survey that I couldn't pass with wine involved. "What's with the bus outside?" I got between their outfit banter. Erin took us into the kitchen where Mike was digging bottles of white wine into a cooler full of ice. Emily picked at blueberries on the counter. "Hey, Alex, they tell us we gotta behave tonight," Mike said. His grip went over while I dove in for a classic shake, and our hands came together like the Boys and Girls Club logo. He looked stylish in sharp suede Oxfords and red chinos. "Is that bus an apology?" I said. I slid behind the far side of the island so he wouldn't see my shoes. "Alex, open your mouth." Emily held up a blueberry. I did, and with a swift flick, she bounced it off my forehead. "That's my ride and my job. I tour the grape fields with bougie rich people on vacation." He fought to find a spot for a sixth bottle. "He talks a lot of yang about wine for someone who makes a living off of it," Erin said. The nail polish and jewelry did little to shine her up. The appalling I don't give a shitness she liberally applied to everything but cooking was still apparent. "All great American men drop out of college, then profit on the backs of people they despise," Mike said. "I'm a patriot, like Walt Disney." "Jobs," I countered. "Boys," Erin butted in. "Kanye," Emily said, then threw another blueberry at me. Mike told me all about his wine touring business and the bus outside he used to shuttle around odd and even couples while huffing out vino factoids and forcing bottled water into everyone's hand. He smiled so much his cheeks had deep vertical grooves. Thick, yet lean, I wondered how I might fight him off if he swooped in to save Erin while I had her face breathing dishwater. I couldn't picture him with Erin. They weren't opposites that attracted so much as they were two things made out of different stuff. A dinner and a tasting was arranged for the four of us. Some wineries bribed to get Mike to bring some of his elite clientele to their establishment, and Mike's bribe to get Erin to forgive him for the unfortunate happenings in the front yard. On the porch we waited for our driver to arrive, some mutual friend who could handle the bus. We looked ridiculous, like an array of mismatched bottles. Emily, a smooth red wine. Mike, a pinstripe bottle of American rye. Erin, a royal blue and gold bottle of Canadian whiskey. And in my blue gingham check, I was a Bavarian beer with ugly shoes. Our chariot looked like a municipal vehicle that had carried disabled teens to their jobs at the Mega Mart, but inside was luxurious and comfy. The rows of seats had been replaced with a large U-shaped bench that sat like a campfire. The bus was full of booze and single people, but nobody was on a date. The caustic gaze of a protective sister on the far side of the bench pushed. The lovely fervor of Emily across from me pulled. Mike sensed the tension, and when I glanced up from Charlie's message on my phone, he was shaking a bottle of wine in each hand. He jigged his feet and used his nose as an arrow to point and hum at each one, asking for a recommendation. Our host, our jester, our savior. The girls and I chorused a yes at him as soon as we understood the question. The first bottle finished, the push and pull got worse. I couldn't stop staring at Emily. She was immaculate. She was also my best path to Erin's unhappiness. My brain clashed into a muddle of black romantic comedy mashups. Let's spoon so I can smother you with a pillow. A lovely carriage ride over the river and through the woods to the hole I've dug for you. Shopping. Were you always a cook, Alex? Emily asked in an attempt to steer the conversation away from wine. Questions, the reason I didn't have any new friends. I tried to be vague without seeming withholding. Nope, I was an engineer for a long time, I said. Engineer is a vague word. It doesn't mean anything. Engineer is a word your high school guidance counselor plants in your head if you're good at math and look like you have trouble talking to girls. Which field? Mike said. Apocalyptic, I said, half kidding. I program manufacturing robots, the ones that replace people. The bus fought its way out of suburbia, and off in the distance the hills were dotted with fewer and fewer houses the further we drove north. Cooking is better? Emily asked. Her words had a happy perk. She leaned back in her seat and folded her arms on her stomach. Erin and I were both hunched up on our thighs, prepared for battle. It's different. Not as good as eating, I said, smiling. Speaking of which, Erin said to everyone, what are we eating tonight? I didn't ask. It'll be pre-fee and catered. They said something about a wine cave dining room, but I've never been to this place. It's way up north, Mike said. It was common for him to get invited by winemakers to taste and visit the grounds. Napa and the surrounding areas have hundreds of wineries, all vying for the busloads of wandering drunks to sell their stories to. I don't know shit about wine compared to the people we'll meet tonight. I'd be laughed out of any SOM exam room, but touring isn't a horticulture class. It's an experience. I'm not a wine guy. As long as it isn't sweet or cold, I'll drink it, I said. I like to put red wine in the freezer when it's hot out, Emily said. She was slapping the rhythm in her head on her stomach. Emily, Erin huffed, fake embarrassed. I've forgotten about it more than once, she continued. Does the bottle break? No. The cork gets pushed out and the wine gushes out the top. I did it a few weeks ago. Erin and I took turns shaking the slush into bowls and we ate it with spoons, Emily said. Erin put cocoa on hers, which I thought was weird. Thanks, Em. Erin shook her head and looked off into the orange hills at the falling sun as we spun away from it, on this lidless world hurling itself through space. Chapter 12. The four of us stumbled back into the gravel parking lot a few hours later, Emily grasping the top of my forearm for balance. Wine drunk is different than beer drunk is different than whiskey. Wine drunk is a happy feet-shuffling impairment, and my feet raked the rocks with crooked steps on the way back to the bus. The driver had a sketch pad laid across the steering wheel. He fumbled to hide a drawing of a cartoon demon with giant, lopsided breasts eating ice cream. His right hand was out for low fives. I plowed a board behind Emily and intentionally tripped so I could thumb the small of her back and burrow my nose into her neck, which I swore smelled like burnt plastic. Our foursome collapsed in different directions, in a sort of mobile triclinium, and like the Romans, all of us were thinking about blood. That Croatian blood wine was the most horrific thing I've ever tasted, Erin said. She looked over at Mike, who was belly up at the back of the bus with his forearm over his eyes. I choked it down, Mike said. The vintner made a big deal about importing extremely rare grapes from some part of Europe where the floors were made of dirt, admiration through scarcity. He should have considered Occam's razor. Maybe they were hard to find because nobody wanted to grow grapes that tasted like a fat lip. It smelled like my multivitamin, Emily said to the ceiling. I poured it out under the table. She kicked her shoes off and sat in the aisle. You bitch, Em. I stepped in that. Erin and I laid facing each other with Emily's knees beneath our noses, heads dangling off the long leather seats. The bus teetered on the gravel and pulled out onto the road. Home? The bus driver asked. Mike leapt up. Home. I wanted to go home. Best wine of the night? I said, for the sake of conversation. None of it was any good, Erin corrected. Best wine of your life? The streetlight slid across the inside of the cabin in squares. Emily tipped over, her bottom stuck to the floor. It might not have been good, but it's working, Mike said, looking sideways at Emily. The day I closed on my first condo, my mom left a bottle of cheap Chianti, wicker shell and all, on the counter. My friends were there that helped me move. One of the guys found a box of plastic cups, not that I own wine glasses, and passed them around, I said. It was the best and only cup of wine I've ever had. There was a card propped up next to the bottle that said, Life only gets better from here. John peeled the straw shell apart, knowing the mess would irritate me, and Charlie took the pieces and assembled them into a giant penis that he rammed into the hole of the cup after he emptied it. I missed happier times, when there was only sweet and no bitter. Erin's eyes flashed slate blue in the passing lights. I staged at a kitchen in Spain for a summer. It was horrible. I didn't speak the language, and I don't think I got a single good night of sleep. My flight home was a disaster, too, stranded in Dublin for a day and a half. I took a cab when I landed because I didn't want to wake anyone up. When I got home, Em was up to greet me with a pitcher of red wine she poured into a plastic juice pitcher and filled with all the fruit in the house. Some of it wasn't even sliced. We swayed on our front porch swing, and I picked strawberry leaves out of my teeth while the sun came up. Emily was sleeping, and Mike was up front. Erin and I were alone in the dark, save for the ring of yellow Christmas lights shrink-wrapped to the floor for legal reasons. There was no move, no deflection. Her sister between us, I faced her for the first time. This wasn't Boss Erin or Competitive Erin or the demonic plague inside the television. It wasn't the girl I was going to kill or the girl who I had to prove was fucking evil. Alcohol is a powerful drug, and it stripped me of my inhibitions and of the constant jabbering of my thoughts. Before me, for the first time, was Erin the human being, a silly girl in the dark who wanted to know all about me, and I the same. Last meal? I said. The cuff of Emily's dress hopped up a tiny bit with each bump in the road. Like death row meal? Yeah, the last meal before you die. Erin smacked at Emily's leg to swat down her dress. A fresh baguette, a bottle of olive oil, and all the butter they can find. You? Ramen, I said. Erin made a face like the bus was passing a chicken farm. You'd want soup? Ramen was sacred to me. It was the first meal I cooked myself. I was a blue-collar kid. The parents did shift work to keep the milk cold and the sneakers fresh. A kid can only eat so much cereal before he gives in and asks how to use the microwave. Then, when I was 10 or 11, they started leaving pasta sauce in the fridge with boiled noodles to nuke. One night there wasn't any sauce and there wasn't any milk, and I found that familiar orange package under a bag of moldy tortillas in our ethnic food cabinet. Chicken ramen, it said. I opened the bag like chips and shook the block out onto the counter. I thought it was meat, a fossilized chunk of ground poultry. The instructions were simple, 4 easy steps to reconstitute the petrified tangle. I lured it over the pot of water while it boiled to make sure I didn't miss whatever magic made that thing edible. The noodles gurgled apart, and when I dove in for a sniff, the steam fogged up my glasses. I flipped the wrapper every which way to try and figure out what the hell I was making. The separate ingredients for noodles and soup base gave it away. I had to fish the silver packet of chicken flavor from the garbage. I thought it was one of those inedible desiccant packs, like the ones inside of bags of beef jerky. I jammed a lick finger into the pouch and tasted it. It looked like powdered jaundice, but I popped it into my mouth anyways. All the moisture flooded to the spot where my finger was stuck to my tongue. The first sensation was a tannic smack, then an umami suck I felt in cringe more than taste. My spit coalesced into a pool of hyper-seasoned chicken stock. Unable to choke it back, the aroma flew up my nose, and my entire body coughed. It wasn't the best taste ever, but it was the most taste ever. "I've only eaten the instant kind," Erin said. "I know it's become a big thing, but when I go somewhere Japanese, I want raw fish." "There's so many great spots around here, you have no excuse." "Then we should go. I'll pay in the name of research," she said. The bottoms of her feet went up on the window, head dangling off the seat, and she was looking at me upside down. "You want to cook ramen now?" I said. "No, I thought you'd want the free meal. It's one of those things I always say I'm going to try and never do." Emily shifted in her sleep, and the top of her knee cracked me in the lip. The taste really was the same as the wine. "There's so many variables. One place isn't enough. You need to eat all the ramen." I rubbed my face. "Can you make it?" Upside down, Erin finally looked like the demon I imagined. "God, no. It's complicated. People spend their whole lives perfecting the broth alone." "What do you like to cook, then? I mean, if you can cook anything." "This sounds a lot like that stupid $1 million game." "So?" she said. "I love games." Mike watched us banter. "Eggs. Stand at the flat top, flip eggs, talk about football, and corrupt aldermen." I wasn't thinking. I was saying. "It must be nice to know what you are. I'm still trying to figure out what I'm supposed to cook. We'll go for soup soon." "We're fat," Mike said. "We're old, we're tired, but this night isn't over." Emily smacked her lips 3 times and said, "Shut up and take me home. Maybe I'll make out with you." She snatched my jacket off the seat and put it under her head. Chapter 13, Day 963. Erin called the whole team together before service. I sat at the bar with the other cooks while the waitstaff huddled around tables in cliques. The people who were serving their way towards something around some tables, and the lifers at others, looking older even if they weren't. Emily, who moonlighted as a server, sat by herself with a bottle of lotion she used to make her hands glossy. The clicking of Erin's shoes preceded her entrance. 2 ballpoint pens and a set of plating tongs were clipped at the side of her apron, like a sergeant's stripes. "Shut up," she said. "Tonight just got a lot more important." Erin waited for people to finish their sentences and give her their undivided attention before she continued. "A real deal, important food critic is coming tonight." She paused to let it sink in and folded her arms. "I got a tip from a friend, and I know it's real because he's allergic to peanuts, and that's on the reservation." Her sleeves were rolled up, and she had a tattoo I never noticed on her forearm, a symbol made of 3 spirals all tangled together. It spun in on itself as she motioned, pleaded, demanded that we execute tonight. 3 connected circles, 1 line. Was it a random Celtic design that she picked up from the parlor book? Or could it have been a toss-up between that and a butterfly on the spine? Or was it a reaction? Life, death, rebirth. Did she mean to suffer when she paid the artist and told him to put the needles into the thinnest part of her thinnest arm? Creation, preservation, destruction. Restaurants live and die by reviews from respected sources. When the food apps and rating sites first came out, society gave the scathing reviews from special snowflake millennials and their self-important rambling too much credence. Now we know to read a review and then check that blabbermouth's other posts to see if they've ever been happy with anything. Ever. Sometimes you can find a photo to go with their location, really get a bead on whose advice you're taking. It was especially crucial for a fledgling eatery marketed somewhere between a kitschy chain restaurant and ultra-luxe eatery to get respectable press. I tapped my feet, tuned out, excited and scared. I knew I was going to feed this asshole peanuts, but I was afraid it might end my adventures. My knees jiggled and knocked while I tried to predict the spot in the dining room where the critic would collapse in anaphylactic shock. Servers swarming around him in a circle, fumbling with their phones to call for help. He'd be fine. An ever-ready mom would jab the poor guy in the thigh with an EpiPen from her purse. "VIP, table 22, Tommy said. The kitchen was electric that night. The staff bought into the notion that Erin's success was their success too, that a glowing spread would change their lives. It was a Friday, so energy was already up so we could feed the growing organism in the dining room. Being on the line was awful, but I liked the immediacy that my work was quantified. A gorgeous return. You cook, they eat, they smile. Or not. You don't have time to watch it. The best you can hope is a glimpse of someone hobbling out the front door. When the VIP ticket went up in the window, I asked the other cooks if it was for the critic. Sometimes friends or birthdays get that tag as well. Erin was at a station in the back, putting together the amuse-bouche, a gelée made from plum brandy. She'd asked me to do it, but spit out my first through fourth tries and called me an idiot. Her play on the dated tradition was delicious, a soft cleanse of the palate, and nothing like the gasoline swab I remembered. I'm sure Slivovitz was no longer a custom wherever it started. Food traditions have the tendency to become ubiquitous, then hated, then mocked, and finally forgotten. When Erin turned towards me, I saw the edge of her tattoo jutting out of the rolled-up sleeve. Invention, abandonment, rediscovery. What's old is new. Everyone hovered over Table 22's appetizers before sending them out for judgment. Erin pulled the towel out of my waist to swipe a fleck of errant sauce from the outer rim of the plate. From inside the circle and over Miguel's shoulder, I saw the top cap of a red squeeze bottle at my station. It stood out against the white subway tile backsplash, half covered by a large blue and white box of kosher salt. We didn't have any peanuts in the kitchen, so I ran down to the corner mart before dinner to grab a can of them. But in the land of healthy and organic, the peanut isn't hung with the whole roasted cashews and grass-fed beef jerky. The only peanut product they sold was a glass bottle of cold-pressed oil, which I dumped into a saucing bottle. The entree order came in. Sauerbraten was called out for me to fire, and I went to work. I grabbed the squeeze bottle of nutted oil and shot half a cup into the bottom of a hot pan, and then tapped a chunky spoonful of sour meat mixture on top before the oil was warm. I slid the bottle down into the front pocket of my apron, careful not to tip it. A few minutes later, we came together again to hover over the plates. We huddled up and waited for Erin to call the play and make some minor change. The chef reminded us that we were only as good as our last dish that we put out. Miguel whittled in between Tommy and me. "Trout looks good. Think we should try smoking it," he said, head between our chests. "Alex," Erin said, but I couldn't hear her. "Alex," she said louder. "What?" "Something in your pocket is leaking. What is that?" The circle broke apart, everyone afraid I was going to get my yuck on them. The white front of my apron had a big yellow spot in the center, like thick, dehydrated urine. The cook scattered away from the plates to maul my crotch, and behind, the expediter pulled the food from the window. She barked a few instructions at the server and sent them on their way. "Fuck off, Tommy, it isn't piss," I said and moved to the back to put the soiled apron into the wash basket. The string bean followed me, Erin too busy yelling at everyone to single him out. Tommy didn't know when to quit. I broke the emulsion on a gallon of aioli earlier in the week, and he called me Mayo Slayer for 2 days. "Let me smell it, let me smell it, let me smell it," Tommy said, wandering after me. The only way to get him to break his tortured artist persona was to make a mistake. Then he became annoying. I threw the apron at him and shoved the bottle of oil into the basket while he fought it off his face. "Gross," he said, the cloth crab-pinched in front of him like a bullfighter's cape. He held it up to his forehead and pecked at the stain until he recognized the scent. "Your piss smells like peanuts." He threw the soiled garment into the tub and walked away disgusted. Chapter 14, Day 964. The stain wasn't forgotten the following morning, but the jokes were silenced by the knocks of Erin's knife against the table. She cleaved cabbage heads and slapped at carrots like they were sides of beef. The blast from each chop made everyone's shoulders buzz and mouths tighten. I tried not to grin. Nobody spoke. The ceiling felt like it was lowering an inch with every hack. The food writer hadn't keeled over in the dining room and put on the convulsive show I hoped, but something was obviously bothering Erin. He came, he saw, he ate, he paid in cash. The chopping sped up. "Sweetheart," Gail said with an even maternal tone, even though she was the youngest in the kitchen. "Are you all right?" "I'm," clunk, "fine," thwack. "Secrets don't make friends," Gail said, voice rising in pitch from the far side of the kitchen where she was working her way through crates of fresh turnips, parsnips, and other edible roots. Gail turned towards her with one hand on a tilted hip, a sassy pose when a girl is about to get real. I hated Gail and tried to set her on fire a few times, unsuccessfully. The first time, I baby-stepped silently behind her with a pot of boiling water, but when she turned and knocked into me, the water flew onto my sleeve instead of hers. My shirt held the steam into the top of my forearm, and it began to blister a few days later. It looked like a cloudy sky at dusk, covered in hair. The other time, I checked her into the stove. Oops. She wasn't as flammable as I hoped. It's been a tough week. Don't worry about me and just do your fucking jobs, Erin said. Her sanity dike was cracking. She looked distressed. Heavier things weighed on her. I stood over a boiling pot of russet potatoes and reveled in the steam. This wasn't work. It was a rejuvenating sauna. Do you want to talk about it? Gail asked while I stacked and unstacked pots and pans above the burners to look busy. I have an idea, Tommy said. Let's all be quiet. His skin was more translucent than normal. He must have been hungover. Tommy, let me at those chickens. Erin pulled out a big knife and swapped spots with him. Alex, you look like you need to pee, Tommy said now that he was next to me. Do you guys want to know why I'm so pissed? Because you want to be like Alex? Tommy said. Everybody laughed but me. It's come to my attention that someone is shit-spicketing lies about our restaurant all over the web, Erin said. She put her knife down and shoved her middle fingers way up into the corners of her eyes. Do you know who it is? Gail asked. I think it's Jamie whatever his name is from Red Apple, Erin replied. Who? Tommy butted in. Big guy, tiny pants, bad breath, I said, still moving pots that didn't need moving. Instinct took over. I blurted the first thing that came to my head. This might not be his fault. Toxoplasmosis and all. Erin squeaked a bit of relief. The cook stared at me, unsure why we were sharing an inside joke. Erin glared at me from around her fingertips, so I clarified to the group what happened. Once I got out enough detail, Erin overrode me with a breathless tirade about Chef Jamie allegedly posting over-the-top yet crush-brutal reviews across every public food app and review site. Furthermore, all the blogs that had ever mentioned Essen got similar write-ups in the comments of the articles. It wasn't all done at once or copy-pasted. This was a thoughtful sabotage. They started last Monday, and each day she discovered more. It was glorious. Jamie was doing my job better than I could. I got a crotch full of peanut oil for nothing, while the shit chef tore the restaurant apart. So much for doing the most damage from the inside. It's everywhere. The worst part is that it's really well written. She went back to her knife and detailed some of the accusations, and then stopped suddenly. Shit. Erin smiled, but the creases at the end of her mouth wiggled, grinning like a missile was pointed at her head. Chef? Gail said, her overprotective shtick all the way up to 10, and we hadn't made it to lunch. Erin set down her knife and buried her hands under a pile of chopped cabbage. She shook her head back and forth. It's so bad, she repeated. What? Tommy said. Erin slid her hands out together, right over left. Under her palm was a steady leak of blood that patted the countertop louder the higher she raised them. It's so bad, she kept saying. Gail rushed to grab the first aid kit from under the counter. She gushed antiseptic goo all over Erin's sliced middle finger. A finger cut did nothing to stop the dark blood from rambling out the bottom in all directions. The cut was deep. It began at the middle joint and went up in a straight line until it curved up to her nail. The gash was so wide that it had to be folded and pinched shut before Tommy could wring tape around it, wrung by screaming wrung. Tommy held her arm overhead, and Gail stuffed gauze into the opening wherever there was room. Blood fluttered down. With each splat on the counter came a graceful skip, hop, or dodge from Erin's triage team. Everyone acted like this was business as usual. Calm, even hands came to her rescue. All the blood made me queasy, and I returned my face to the relaxing steam of the potatoes to settle my stomach. The first aid kit was dumped across the table. Tommy and Gail rifled through the various tapes and bandages to find something that would plug her hole. Erin continued spouting everywhere. Honey, this one needs stitches, Gail said. Erin sat with her legs crossed on the floor, an exasperated expression across her blood-spattered face. The injured arm was up, a pole waving the red and white striped flag of a hand. Tommy did his best to finish taping her shut, and then stood at the ready with his hands held out to plug any serious leaks. Alex, you've got to take her, Tommy said, motioning to me with his foot. No, blood freaks me out. I don't think it's the blood that bothers me. It's the mess it makes. You're the least valuable, he said. Slow, Gail said. Useless, Erin said from the floor. They can put out dinner. All you can do is boil potatoes. She had a point. I hoped I'd get the chance to whisk Erin around town with a fresh stab wound, but I didn't think she'd be in the front seat giving directions. Banking a bit of plausible deniability wasn't a bad way to start the day. Plus, I got to look the other way while she bled. Erin used my shoulder to slide down into the passenger seat of my car, with the injured arm held up as high as she could. My arm ached in sympathy, and the pain reminded me of being ignored by my teachers in grade school when I had answered or asked too many questions. I didn't put my arm down. I propped it up forever with my opposite hand to spite them, and it would hurt the rest of the day. The blood ran down her arm and soaked into the left half of her shirt. It wasn't the color I expected. Through the window, the dried pellets of blood on the top of her head looked like ticks as I shut the door. Erin pointed me to an urgent care center close by, her voice steady but face the color of spoiled milk. My front seats were superheated and burned whatever part of me lingered on the leather. The sun seared us from just above the top brow of the windshield. I got up on my left cheek until it started to hurt and then shifted back to my right. Our asses withstood different temperatures and we shifted out of time. I turned the air conditioner knobs, desperate for cool air. This wasn't the first dash from the restaurant to the emergency room, Erin told me. Her knuckles were white, an injured hand clenched to make sure what blood she had left stayed put. I've had worse, she said, staring into her hand. She'd given worse, too, but she was split open, and I was happy for the moment. You didn't have to cut yourself to go home early. She hummed at me like the humor failed, but was appreciated. I like scars. I want something to talk about when the nurse is changing my diaper when I'm old. I liked her defeatist mentality. The who could love me, I'll be alone forever in her voice, a remnant of remorse I didn't expect. What's the worst kitchen injury you've had? I asked with the perked tone that made her suck her teeth. An early job, classic French. They had this old beige food processor that looked like it was from the disco era. The chef owner was so cheap he probably got it at a garage sale. It was really hard to get it to turn on, even when it was snapped incorrectly. I got tired of jiggling and fussing with it, so I smashed the safety switch with a bent fork. That way it would turn on even if the base wasn't attached. Right or left at the next light? Right, all the way down the hill. So I was breaking up some peppers inside it with a spoon when someone bumped me from behind. My hands went out on the table to catch my balance, but I inadvertently pushed the processor on and knocked it over at the same time. The blades whirled and the spoon went rocketing into my hand. She let go of the gauze and turned the back of her hand to me. Under the first knuckle was a centipede scar that reached down the opposite side and stopped at the lump of bone where her wrist began. How many stitches? 34, I think. It's that tall building on the left. I drove into the parking lot instead of stopping at the front entrance to let her out. She looked at me, then looked down. You don't have to stay. Oh, yes, I did. She could scream or cry or die. Worst case, she'd get doped up and chatty. Chapter 15. The waiting room was so full I had to walk the sitting area twice to find 2 empty seats next to each other. I wondered if the other people avoided my seat because an oozing monstrosity sat here first, infecting it. I didn't like hospitals. They were better equipped to get you sick than healthy. A raisin-headed lady sharing the end table beside me dropped used tissues on top of a food magazine, the bottom line reading, "The Top 10 Best Burgers." Superglue is the best way to avoid this place, Erin said. It can hold a cut shut really well. Noted. I went up to the window to retrieve Erin's insurance card and ID when they called her name. The nurse slid them under the glass safety window designed to protect the employees from the bacterial weaponry floating in the waiting area, and said it might be a while. Every chair had thin, slatted arms, and I scooched towards Erin with as much subterfuge as I could manage until the arms kissed. I sucked myself into the seat, not touching or breathing more than necessary. Erin was nonchalant about being a bloody mess. She sat facing me with one foot up on the chair bottom and leaned against the far arm in a family TV night pose. Her upward arm covered the stain on her shirt, so the only blood I could see in the frame was stuck on the loose tangles of her hair that fell and swung like tiny wrecking balls. The buzz glow of the overhead lights shined up the spots on her cheek where she'd wiped globs from her face. Erin's disembodied head floated in the box above her arm. "This was karma," she said. "How's that?" More snotty tissues hit the table behind me. Each time the woman with the tiny head coughed, air puffed against the back of my neck. "I cut myself because I was off in my head being nasty, crafting long letters to blogs in all caps and all fucks to get them to remove Jamie's bullshit. I'm glad this happened. I would have made things much worse." "Resolution is better than reaction," I said, and got temporarily confused by my own cognitive dissonance. Sounds like a quote with a pencil bust of a dead guy in a tunic next to it. You got anything more honest? She was right. It was a bit kitsch, even if it was original. Revenge wasn't snickering at a flesh wound. I still didn't know if I was being patient or procrastinating. She was missing half her blood, and some part of me felt bad. The patient man's fury lays waste to all. But I wasn't building towards release. What if I was just digging in the dark to justify a manufactured raise? "Do you know it was him?" I asked. "I think it's obvious." "Certain?" "No. In my experience, there's no way you'll have the motivation or the right to give him what he deserves unless you know what he did and why he did it. Besides, it'll be fun." "I think you're just saying that because you want an excuse to fling cat shit on him yourself." Erin's chin rested on her shoulder. Knots of hair swayed back and forth, back and forth. "If only. Speaking of poop, how do you know Mike?" "Back and forth," she lulled me. "He walked into the restaurant the first day we opened, holding a freeze-dried pouch, one of those military meals that last 50 years. "He was in the military?" "The Army, I think. He worked nearby at the time and said he'd eat lunch here every day if we could recreate it. I wonder if he ever killed anyone." Soft flecks of cough grazed my arm, so I turned in towards Erin. I put my arm up on the rest and dropped my head into the palm of my hand. Our faces were so close that everything was out of focus except for her watermelon eyes. "He never saw combat. He just liked them. I guess they sit around like bags of chips for guys to snack on." Erin jammed her cheek into the crook of her elbow to keep her arm up. The blood on the gauze was dry and black. "Was it a flavored paste, like astronaut food?" "No, it's real food. You heat it with salt water and chemical reaction. Chili mac. Looked like dog vomit." I'd eaten MREs on camping trips with Charlie. The food goes in a bag with magnesium powder that reacts with salt water to boil it. Erin knew this, but she didn't have the need to prove she was smart. "So you made it for him?" "Emily begged me to do it. She thought he was so cute. Now she makes it for him so I don't have to deal with it." "I'm confused. When you invited me to go out with you..." She cut me off. I know. I feel stupid saying this, and not just because I'm sort of flipping you off right now. But the other night when I told you there was a guy, or whatever I said, I was talking about you." "Erin," the nurse said, opening a wheelchair-wide aluminum door. "Erin Rhodes." Erin got up without looking at me and walked through the stark white passage. The two-way door swung shut and then in a little bit. Out, in, out, and closed. On the back it read, "Entrance only." I searched for a bathroom, and next to the glass box where we checked in was a matching door. It was stamped, "Exit only." Erin was stuck somewhere in the hallway that connected them, and I was left to decide whether to leave or follow, to be patient or procrastinate. I jogged into the men's room and puked in the sink before I could get to the stall. I pumped a handful of pink soap onto my hand and then slathered it on the back of my neck like sunscreen. The cold goo ran down my spine and stuck the middle of my shirt to my back. I puked again. Chapter 16. There was no arguing with Erin. 21 stitches wasn't enough to keep her from going back to work. It wasn't that I cared. After what she'd said in the waiting room, I didn't want to see her face the rest of the day. It was a silent ride back to the restaurant. I didn't turn my head once to see her expression, as her words of affection turned my world into the sort of unimaginable bazaar you can only find in a Salvador Dali painting. Erin didn't say a word either, probably because she felt awkward and vulnerable. The blood in her hair was no longer comforting. It was bothersome, unclean. Thankfully, she spent most of the night in her office, but every few hours she'd trudge up the stairs and offer us a few criticisms. I understood her game. She felt exposed, and this was her way of reclaiming control by belittling my hard work. It was overwhelming to think about going on a date with her while trying to help with service. Getting close to her was one thing, but I couldn't imagine holding her hand like it was anything but the tail of a dead possum. I thought about her jutted face, what I would do if she tried to press it against mine and gulp, her lips that arched and puckered when she talked, pursed when she thought, and smack when she tasted. What would I do if they came after me? No part of her was safe. All of her was out to get me. Once the tickets were cleared and the cleaning began, I wandered below to tell her terrible lips what a terrible idea this was, to make the thin and translucent edges of her mouth, inviting like moldy yogurt, take back what she said and avoid disaster. It was a wicked opportunity, not like a regular first date where you're filling in the basics. I get to dig deep. A first date with someone you work with is less an interview and more an invasion of privacy. Questions get asked that might not come up in the first year of a relationship. You know what they like to eat, what kind of foam person they are, if they're afraid of thunder. It was a godsend and a death sentence. No alibi, no self-control, no quarter. Go home, Gail repeated when I got to the office door. Erin held up the back of her arm, and a swaddle of gauze around her swollen middle digit let her know she wasn't going anywhere. Unable to cook, Erin spent the evening printing and plastering every defamatory comment and review she could find on the otherwise barren drywall. I read the nearest batch from the doorway. User Morel Hunter 22 rated 1 out of 5 stars. The food was uninspired, boring, bland. Grandma's cooking if she forgot love and salt. The ambiance disconnected me from the experience. Modern paintings on the walls, but glops and slops on the plate. It just isn't good. Reply from Marty Foie Gras. That was not my experience with the service at Essen at all. I'm open-minded, but my server trounced over with a frown and a neck tattoo. Her hair was tousled like she spent the last 10 minutes in the bathroom with one of the waiters. She was greasy. All may have been forgiven if she didn't chop at me with some of the big no-nos any decent restaurant would train out of their staff. She told me and my wife that she'd be taking care of us, and asked my wife if she was done working on that, while pawing under her plate like it was biscuits and gravy in a late-night truck stop. The food was unmemorable and overpriced. The service, abhorrent. User, Fiddlehead Lover, rated 1 out of 10 smiles. The only dining experience I've had worse than this was forcing down one of those rotating hot dogs at a rural gas station on a road trip. Essen did not deliver the refined comfort food it promised. This place is the new American cuisine, overpriced and pretentious. I snapped the last sheet off the wall and waved it, saying, "This guy said you were better than gas station food." She forced a grin. I wasn't sure what I was seeing in the walking Rorschach mess of her sticky hair. I know it's him. Done working on that. If I ever heard a server say that, I'd punch him in the throat. You can't react until you know, I said, and picked at the other reviews. They were tacked all over the wall in an upside-down parabola, the shape of a mountain. Each one was diverse in tone and content. I knew it was Jamie too, but if I told Erin to stab back in the dark, then what did that say about me? The reviews hit on different fears that chefs have, a scattershot approach to make sure he nailed whatever her weakness was. She sorted them based on content. The base of the mountain was an overlap mess, thumbed up without thought, all accusations of mechanical failure, a dirty fork, the wrong wine suggestion, odor. Up the hill, the attacks became more personal, addressing specific aspects like ambiance. At the top were the ones that got to her, the identity assassinations, that the concept of the restaurant itself failed to deliver. Only another chef would attack that. "How do we find out?" she said. "I have a friend coming to town soon. If I can have that weekend off, we'll find out." "Done. You aren't fast enough to be here during weekend service anyways. I'm really sorry about earlier. I know that was uncomfortable." Her injured hand was flat on the desk, and the good fingers were covered in fresh, red nail polish. "Did you mean it?" I asked. "Mean what?" "That shit about liking me." No, I'd lost a lot of blood, she snorted, and it was sort of cute given the situation. I don't know why I told you that. Then why did you say it? I said and plopped into the chair across from her, feeling relieved. A thumbtack fell off the wall and hit the floor with a ting. The light from the geometric screensaver on her computer swirled across her eyes, and I hung in the spiral, over and back around. Do you really want to do this right now? Erin said, down a pint of blood and looking the color of a boiled turnip. There was a half milkshake in her left hand. Yeah, most of the time I'm here you're calling my work garbage. It's just a strange thing for you to say. Being your boss has nothing to do with, she sighed, with that. The width of her lips crunched under her nose and spread so thin they were barely there at the ends. Two fat isosceles triangles set back to back and slathered a color halfway from orange to white. A pencil was jabbed through her bun like a magician jabs swords through his exotic assistant in the rattan box. Then why the hell did you say it? I need to know. It's weird, but I need to know so we can move on. I haven't gone on a date in years. Years, Alex. I told myself a while back, the next guy I met who was positive, nice, decent looking, that I'd ask him out. I mean, what's the worst that could happen, right? But you're my employee. I wasn't thinking straight. She knew how to pick 'em. The compliment broke something in me. I pitied her, her instincts. She didn't attract chaos. She was attracted to it. She was no longer a faceless package of bacon. She was a pig with a name. Like that pig, the rest of her days deserved to be happy until that bad one, the day the lights get turned out. I'll make you a deal, I offered. If you go home and get some rest, we can go out for dinner, and I'll prove what a horrible idea this is. A small concession to get this pity out of my system. Alex, no, I was way out of line. Breakfast, then? It was then I understood why she called me positive. Have you ever been in a bad relationship? She said, looking down. Sure. Really bad? Alex, get your ass up here, Tommy called from the top of the stairs. He's right. You should go. Should we pretend like this never happened? I'll make you a deal, Alex. You come with me tomorrow afternoon, and if after that you still want to take me to dinner, then we can go. I guess so. I wasn't trying to be pushy. I can be obsessive. I like closure, I said. I've noticed. That's why I'm offering. Sometimes I push the dry goods containers out of line because I know it bothers you. That's mean. I need to go. One more thing. Stop changing my fucking writing on the whiteboard. I have no idea what you're talking about. I stood up. I'm off tomorrow. What time? She told me while I sulked off to clean. I mopped and wiped the rest of the night. The drone of cleaning had me questioning what the hell I was doing. I couldn't figure out if my niceties were a guise, some costume I wore to prevent myself from falling into the abyss of despair, or was it a sincere human reaction to try and climb out of all the awfulness I'd turned my world towards? Maybe I was the pig and not Erin, enjoying my time in the pasture, sucking up the corn and dirt and the rain, and unknowingly awaiting my bad day. Chapter 17, Day 967. Mike dove his head into my chest and I tumbled onto the blacktop. Basketball under his arm, he helped me up. Can't we play horse instead? I asked. You need exercise. He bounced me the ball. It was early the next morning at a park in town. A group of boys ran back and forth, flying a drone like I'd done with kites. They zoomed around the chain-link fence that surrounded the court a half-dozen times. The drone sputtered as the battery died, and it jerked its way down to the ground. One of them scooped it up, and they ran off. Our game had escalated from friendly hangout to violent melee in the span of 3 or 4 possessions. It's a mistake to call football the contact sport. Football is a collision sport. Basketball is a contact sport. Greasy elbows, mashed cheeks, forearms scrape across sweat-soaked shirts. It's gross, but fun, until our 30-year-old knees began to feel their age. H, Mike said as my 3-point shot bricked off the front of the rim. You want to get some lunch after this? I don't have anything going on today. Yeah, I'm meeting up with Erin this afternoon, so can we stay around here? Mike stood behind the backboard and threw the ball straight up and over, a trick shot I used to practice in my driveway. Work thing? Don't think so. You guys aren't dating, are you? That's stupid. Of course not. I ran my fingers over the leather, looking for worn spots that were soft and smooth. Why? You into her? I hit a jumper from 20 feet on the baseline. Shit. He stepped over to me with the ball and spun it backwards off the ground a few times. Ice queens aren't my thing. Emily is more my deal. H, I said. Interesting. Does she know? Everybody knows. But you aren't together. I missed a shot from the top of the key. No. Those girls are complicated, man. Different, but complicated. Mike missed from the same spot. Damn, we suck. What do you want for lunch? I said. Mike bounced the ball from the free throw line and missed the hoop and hit the fence behind the goal. There's an unlimited sushi place across the street. Mike was on his butt in front of his gym bag, swapping out sneakers for flip-flops. Expensive? Nah, it's cheap, but the service is fucked. The menu is on these cheap, off-brand tablets that don't work right. The orders don't always get in, and the food takes forever to come out. Mike held his hand out for me to help him up. The waitress gets super angry when you tell her the tablet isn't working too. I pulled at the collar of my shirt, and the breeze chilled my sweaty chest. Sounds amazing. Maybe we'll get lucky and get someone nice. No shot. I've been there like 9 times, and it's always the same mean-ass girl. She might be really pretty. I can't tell. Why? Because she's fucking terrifying. Is that why you keep going back? No, I go back because it's $20. I ate 11 rolls last time I was there. You want to have a contest? That bitch will love that. Erin was waiting for me in front of the restaurant when I walked up. She was in jeans and had a giant leather satchel swooped over her shoulder. Hey, I said. Why the hell are you all sweaty? She flipped her foot out. You didn't tell me where we were going. You said be here, and I'm here. You look horrible. I just lost a sushi eating contest. My tummy hurts. She ran inside and fetched an unopened package of white t-shirts, unisex, size small. I waited until we got in the car to change so I could hit her in the face while fighting my damp shirt over my head. Fuck! Watch it! Sorry. The nail of my pointer finger scratched the soft skin next to her eye. Erin drove with loose hands on the wheel, wrapping her first and second fingers to the radio. Can you tell me where we're going, please? I ripped the package of shirts with my teeth. This time I hit her in the ear. Jesus! Sorry. She pulled to the side of the road and set her head on her open hands. You're being really odd, I said. She grumbled at me. I like to be in control. I waited and then said, You're freaking me out. We're going somewhere really important to me. I need you to be cool and not tell anyone. Can you do that? Yes, but can you tell me where we're going? I squiggled in my seat to try and get the shirt to sit right. It was pinching at me in every direction. No. There was a long bout of silence. That shirt is way too small. You look ridiculous. She calmed herself and pressed on. Is that going to matter? Erin turned to inspect me every few minutes and made ghastly faces each time I readjusted. After a while, we turned into the parking lot of a beautiful limestone library. The facade was old and spotted with moss and dark gray discolorations like on the faces of old men. I thought we might be doing a workshop on how to pick produce or a cooking demo. Maybe it's for the best, you looking like an idiot, she said. The shirt creaked and tore when I got out of the car. I picked and pulled at it all the way to the front door. Grief Journal, Day 610. I ducked into a corporate coffee shop to get a root beer. I don't drink coffee, but those places usually have a reach-in cooler in the front filled with designer carbonated beverages, foul fermented health drinks, and blended spinach smoothies. I was exhausted after an afternoon spent birthday shopping for my mom. She's the kind of person who doesn't want anything she doesn't need, and doesn't think she needs anything. I've never given her a gift she didn't take issue with. It didn't discourage me. If she wanted to be miserable, that was her business. I stood in line annoyed by the obnoxious organic label on the soda in my hand. My index finger traced the embossed letters of the stout glass bottle, and the girl next to me shifted her weight from her left foot to her right. She was beautiful, and any chance I get to talk to a beautiful girl, I take it. Not because she's beautiful, but because she's beautiful and she might also be charming. If she's both, the universe demands I fall in love with her, if only for the time we spend talking. Love measured in seconds is every bit as good as love measured in years for the time you spend in it. She was tall, and her dark, straight hair lightened and curled up at the ends, as if it were uncomfortable being too far from her face, like the top branches of trees in a dense forest that bend themselves back towards the sun. She looked athletic enough to throw a punch, but too delicate to take one. I scanned her up and down, not for an object of fantasy, but one of conversation. "What are you reading?" I said, motioning to the book cupped in her hand. Her gaze lingered on the handsome barista who pumped slick brown goo into a cup of ice for her chai latte, non-fat, with whip. Once she realized I was talking to her, she wrinkled her nose while scanning me to determine if I was a threat. I was dressed like usual, a solid-color t-shirt and jeans. In black and white, I'd look like a member of the Beat generation whose clothes were a bit too tight. I smiled to comfort her, to say I was a regular person and not the type of guy who wore his sunglasses backwards on his head or owned a bunch of tank tops. "It's a memoir," she said with hesitation, not willing to share much. Gross. When a girl acts put off, I respond in kind. It either ends up endearing me to her, or it buries the conversation, and we both can move on without any more awkwardness. "Oh, no, it isn't what you think. It's not some trashy Hollywood thing. It's the story of a girl who killed her boyfriend in self-defense. It's heartbreaking," she said. Her fingers were wrapped around the top of the book, and she held it up to her chest like a shield. She crunched the receipt stuffed along the top as a bookmark, while I struggled to put together a response. A girl once killed a boy I knew, but it wasn't self-defense. "I hope you aren't reading it as an instruction manual," I deflected. "No," she laughed. "I haven't had to kill any of my boyfriends. Yet." And just like that, I fell in love. She grabbed her tea from the counter and sat at a small table beneath the front window to read. I paid for my soda with a credit card because a few dollar bills and change weren't enough to enjoy a non-GMO, organic, creamy bottle of real sugar water. She stopped me on my way out the front door. I thought our cued romance was finished. "Do you want to sit?" Her honest invitation turned my torso into an overinflated tire. Acceptance bumbled from my lips. Sun beamed through the window onto her hair, and I admired the darkest part, the half not exposed by the dense rays. The harsh light on her right cheek revealed no flaws and upped my internal pressure. "I'm Alex," I said, trying to get comfortable in a stiff metal chair. "And no girl has tried to kill me. Yet." I scooted under the dinner plate with legs between us. Behind me sat a pair of worn leather club chairs I'd have rather sat in. The fart sounds Leather made would have eased the tension of Boy Meets Girl. She dipped her lips into the whip top of her drink, and when she pulled it back, it left no trace. "It's nice to meet you. I'm Jessica." "So, Alex, why come to a coffee shop and buy soda?" "You're not drinking coffee either," I said, and spun the book on the table around so I'd have something to comment on if there was a lull in conversation. The book was face down, the dust jacket a glossy white. The reflection from the sun made it impossible to read. "What are you out doing?" Other than bothering people about their books, of course. "Shopping for my mom's birthday, which is impossible." Seated with my back to the door, a bell rang above me each time someone came or went. "Oh, I know. I never know what to get my mom." Her hands interlocked around the cup, and she leaned towards me. "Last year I tried a gift certificate to a nice Italian restaurant, but my stepdad ended up enjoying the food more than Mom, so the whole year she's been insinuating I love him more," I said. "My mom's a nutter, too." "I asked you about your book because I was hoping to give her something tangible this year, something less subjective than food." "You think taste in art is less subjective than food?" Jessica said and let out a loud laugh. "Books are dangerous gifts." "I already feel like an idiot, but please, go on." "What's wonderful and impossibly thoughtful for one person is an albatross to another. The book doesn't have to be off by much to make someone think you don't know them at all, or worse, that you're using it to inject them with your own beliefs." Jessica hunched forward to keep the glare of the falling sun out of her eyes. I could have sat there forever and watched her toggle in and out of the light. I flipped her book over and ran my middle finger down the spine. The white cover had the shadow of a couple holding hands that lurched up from the bottom like a pair of twisted monstrosities walking through the park. "So this book wouldn't make a good gift?" I said and slapped the top with a high five. Not unless you think your mom should shoot your dad. I'm not sure why I picked it up at the bookstore, but the moment I opened it, I couldn't stop reading. I love true crime, but I've never heard about this in the news or anything. The shooting happened about a year ago in Virginia, a couple in their mid-20s. As Jessica continued her description, I tried to rewind the words from her delicate lips and delete them as fast as she could fling them towards me. Virginia, chef, boyfriend, handgun, self-defense, trial, murder, 5 shots, not guilty. Her book report was an oral history of my nightmares, but with far less blood. Frantically, I opened the back cover to find a photo of the author. I spun through the pages like a cartoon flipbook, resting it back on the table when no photos were found. Sunlight gleamed off the cover like a headman's axe at high noon. With and Without You, it read. A story of disastrous love by Erin Rhodes. What's wrong with you? Jessica said to try and break the silence as I stared down at the cover, chest heaving. I didn't move. My hands were on my cheeks, my eyes unfocused as the book beneath me split and faded away. I knew Erin Rhodes. I didn't know she wrote a book, but I knew exactly what she'd done. I'd seen her on TV with a long-neck goose microphone bent in front of her prison-striped pantsuit, in text messages from friends with links to local news coverage of her trial. Before that, I'd seen her in pictures. She was the girl in the photo that was hugging my best friend John. At night, I don't see her. I only see John's bulleted body. Sometimes the holes in his chest look like the 5-side of a dice. Other times, I don't remember. When my sight came back, so too did a violet purpose, vivid and purple as electrified neon gas against a dark, clear sky. Our 8-minute romance was finished. Everything my life had been to that point was finished. I stood up fast and shrieked the bottom of the chair across the tile. My point had been tipped. I had a new and lonely reason to be. I was going to kill Erin Rhodes. I underestimated how much could change in a few sick and lovely minutes. Sit down one man, stand up another. That's the power of beauty and charm. I grabbed Magnificent Jessica's book with both hands and said my best goodbye to the girl whose smile and curls harmonized with me for a handful of imperfect minutes. The book hunkered up in my armpit. I fumbled with my wallet while she watched me mull the inadequacy of $2 bills stuffed in the folds. Jessica saw the terror behind my eyes. Her fingertips wrapped my forearm for a squeeze. Then she turned up her palm, like I was a moth she caught on a lampshade and was releasing me back into the unpredictable wind. I took that book with me everywhere and told myself I was going to read it, but never could. I stopped for gas the night of the great mistake and saw it on the floor through the window. When the tick-tick-tick of the pump jiggled and thumped to a stop, I snatched it up off the floor. The binding gave way and the pages jumped towards the ground. The dust jacket puffed like a parachute, and the meat of the pages dangled and clung to the glued edges. I flopped it back into its resting position, riffled the pages a few times with my thumb, and then tossed it into what I thought was the garbage can. The book hung halfway out of the window wash station, blue fluid dripping from the edges. My interview is tomorrow, and I'm about to begin a dangerous game. If Erin saw me with that book, well, I might end up with a pattern on my chest just like John. I tried to drive off, start this journal, and sharpen my knives one last time, but I couldn't bring myself to leave the book. I wrung the blue from the pages by beating it against the side of the pump. Then I tossed it into the trunk. Hopefully it's still legible. I'd hate to have to pay for a copy. Hey guys, thanks for listening to the first half of my book. The second half will be uploaded to YouTube shortly. Here's the Amazon page if you want to go out and get yourself a copy. If you're enjoying it that much, it's available in ebook and paperback format. If you want to support me without spending money, links are below to all my stuff where you can share on social media or join my mailing list or share the video with someone or do any of the things that I'm sure you know how to do to support people. So thank you so much. I hope you're enjoying it, and we'll see you for the second half here in just a minute.